He stood on the ramparts of the Red Keep at the break of dawn, the wind gusting in from the Blackwater Bay. Jon Snow, once the bastard of Winterfell, once the king in the north, once a man who knew nothing, was now the king of the Seven Kingdoms in name and in truth. By his side, Daenerys Targaryen, silver-haired and regal, gazed out upon the capital city they had come to restore, their hands intertwined, fingers laced, sharing warmth against the early chill. The first faint glow of sunrise painted the sky a fragile pink, and the new king and queen watched in solemn silence, each remembering the trials that had led them here. It had been only a moon's turn since their wedding, a unifying marriage, blessed by both the faith of the Seven and the old gods at Jon's insistence, sealed upon the remnants of a battered realm. It was a symbolic moment that should have come long before dragons and armies clashed, before blood was spilled on the fields of the north and the south alike. Yet in that hour, as the dawn slowly revealed itself over a city that had once roiled with suspicion, fear, and grief, Jon felt something he had not known for years. Hope. Hope not tinged by desperation, but a gentle, steady belief that perhaps things could truly be better. The woman at his side embodied that hope as well. Daenerys, breaker of chains, mother of dragons, her spirit tempered by harsh lessons of war. She, too, had learned that conquest alone could not fill the emptiness in her heart nor forge the unity necessary to heal a fractured land. He remembered her quiet tears when the fighting was done. In that final, decisive confrontation with the White Walkers, the living had emerged victorious, but at a cost so severe that it threatened to plunge the world into anarchy and ruin. The sacrifice of so many northern warriors weighed heavily on Jon. Daenerys' armies, the Unsullied and the Dothraki, had been decimated, and the survivors carried invisible wounds as they trudged through the ashes toward an uncertain tomorrow. The threat of the dead was ended, but in its wake, bitterness lingered. She might have rallied what remained of her strength to Siege King's Landing in a storm of dragonfire, but something in Jon's words and her own unfolding empathy held her back. She listened. She saw the destruction wrought upon the innocents, saw that the cycle of fear and violence would only continue if she pressed forward as a conqueror and not a liberator. In that breath of respite, their love blossomed from a place of trust and necessity to something real. They spoke more gently to each other. They broke bread together in the battered halls of Winterfell, forging a bond that would prove more powerful than armies. And so, a different path had been set. Their decision to wed came not from arrogance, but from a dawning understanding that the realm would never heal unless the Targaryen queen and the Stark-born king brought the strengths of both south and north together. Jon's parentage, once a secret that threatened to unravel everything, now served to unite rather than divide. He was Aegon Targaryen in truth, but to the free folk, to the lords of the north, and to many across the land, he was and would always be Jon Snow, a man who had bled for them, fought for them, and who knew the burden of leadership not as a right but as a duty. The bells throughout King's Landing tolled for the morning prayers. Daenerys gently squeezed his hand, and he recognized the radiance in her violet eyes. She was queen in every sense, but she carried no trace of the cold, unwavering ambition that had once driven her onward. Instead, she carried a deep responsibility. They made their way down the steps, shoulders brushing, the hush of the early hour wrapping around them like a comforting cloak. Though they had reclaimed the Red Keep in the name of peace rather than war, reminders of the past lay scattered everywhere. The blackened scorches on the stone walls where dragonfire once reigned. The battered gates, still awaiting full repair after the siege led by Cersei Lannister had crumbled the city's defenses. There was no longer an iron throne in the throne room. Daenerys had destroyed it herself, acknowledging that the realm needed a different symbol, one less drenched in blood and ambition. A circle of high-backed chairs had replaced it, arranged around a table etched with the map of Westeros. Here, matters of governance were decided by the king and queen and their council, face to face, each voice heard. This was the new seat of power, a round table more reminiscent of the small council chambers than the imposing dais of old. Jon found it fitting. The pomp of the Iron Throne had never suited his taste. In the corridor, they encountered Ser Davos Seaworth. The man bowed slightly, but Jon saw the warmth in his eyes. "Your Graces," Davos greeted them in a soft tone, still not quite accustomed to the new forms of address. "I trust you both slept well?" Jon nodded. "As well as a man can in this city. I'd almost forgotten how restless King's Landing can be." Daenerys offered a small smile. We'll bring them peace of mind, Davos. That's the promise we made. The older knight gave a nod, relief mingled with admiration. He had seen enough war in his lifetime to know the cost of broken promises. Jon admired Davos's loyalty, steadfast, guided by conscience, always with a finger on the pulse of the common folk. Under the new rule, Davos would serve on the small council, advising on matters of trade and the distribution of resources. The realm's coffers had been emptied by war, and so his counsel was needed now more than ever. They continued onward, escorted by the hush of the Red Keep's corridors. The hush might have seemed oppressive once, but Jon felt it as a reprieve, a gentle lull in the storm that had beset Westeros for too long. Daenerys led him into the council chamber, the large round table dominating the space. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, illuminating the intricate design carved onto the table's surface, familiar to them both, for it bore the topography of the entire continent. Brienne of Tarth stood near a window, her posture straight and proud, sword belted at her side. She had traveled south from Winterfell to stand at the king's side as the captain of the Queen's Guard, for Daenerys had insisted upon a reformation of the King's Guard and the Queen's Guard, splitting the duties of protection between them so neither was overshadowed. In those pale blue eyes, Jon saw unwavering integrity, a reflection of the vow she had once made to protect the Stark daughters. Her new oath now embraced both king and queen, and she took it as gravely as she ever had. Beside Brienne was Tyrion Lannister, his hands folded, a complicated look passing over his features. No man had gained or lost so much in this war as Tyrion. He had served his family, then broke with them. He had advised Daenerys, then feared her darker impulses, and now, at last, he seemed to have settled into a place of solemn acceptance that this realm needed a guiding hand. Daenerys had appointed him Hand of the Queen, but Tyrion had insisted that he serve both king and queen, bridging the rifts that once tore them apart. It was a role he wore with humility, haunted by his past mistakes, yet determined to correct them. Grey Worm arrived last, accompanied by a smattering of Unsullied. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his posture had eased compared to the immediate aftermath of the war. He had lost Missandei, and that loss had almost driven him past the brink of mercy. But Daenerys' tempered approach and Jon's unwavering pleas had held him back from unleashing the fury he harbored. Now Grey Worm commanded the Unsullied as the chief peacekeeping force in King's Landing, ensuring order was kept. Though he had once wanted only vengeance for what had been taken, over time, Jon had seen a guarded acceptance in his eyes. Here was a place he could protect innocence, preserve some hope in a world that had stolen so much from him. The council came to order with a gentle hush rather than a cacophony of demands. Jon sat, Daenerys at his right hand, each meeting the gazes of those gathered. The issues of the day lay before them. The harvest from the Reach had been poor, the waters around the Iron Islands were host to new pirate threats, and the rebuild of the city's infrastructure was proceeding slower than expected. But there was no talk of war. Instead, each matter revolved around growth, restoration, and the forging of alliances. It felt like a foreign concept after years of conflict, but one that the king and queen meant to nurture with unwavering resolve. Tyrion spoke at length about negotiations with the Lords of the Reach to assist with distribution of grains. The once fertile lands had taken their toll in the wars. Fields burned, irrigation canals neglected, and peasants scattered. The Tyrell line was effectively shattered with the loss of Marjorie, Loras, and Olenna. House Tarly, though gravely diminished, remained. Samwell Tarly, brother of the new king's sworn brothers in the Night's Watch, had inherited what was left. Tyrion glanced in Jon's direction. Sam is eager to help, but he's also weighed down by the shortage of workers and materials. I propose a royal proclamation offering land and rights to any small folk willing to resettle in the Reach and work the fields. Otherwise, we risk famine, your graces. Daenerys considered this. And these small folk, where would they be coming from? We have many refugees in King's Landing itself, Tyrion replied. Some from the Riverlands, some from the Crownlands, all displaced by the fighting. They've been living in makeshift camps for too long. This could be an opportunity to give them new life and at the same time revitalize the Reach. Jon exchanged a look with Daenerys, remembering how many families were left homeless after the dead marched and after the armies clashed. War had raged up and down the land. Let's see it done. But we must ensure that these people are protected on the journey and treated fairly once they arrive. Many of them have lost everything. Tyrion nodded. Grey Worms Unsullied can guard the caravans. And perhaps if we coordinate with the new lords in the Reach to provide seed and livestock, We can ensure they have a proper start." A small dip of Daenerys' head indicated her agreement. "Draft the proclamation at once, Lord Hand, and we will sign it." They moved to the next issues swiftly, a comforting pattern to the day's business. They spoke of establishing a new library in the city, open to all, an idea Samwell Tarly had championed. They planned for the forging of roads through the Crownlands to help merchants reach King's Landing with greater ease. Peace required more than simply an absence of fighting. It demanded prosperity, unity, and a sense of shared purpose. When the council concluded, Daenerys lingered in her seat. The others filtered out, Grey Worm returning to his station, Tyrion off to draft letters and proclamations, and Davos to speak with the city's blacksmiths about forging plows instead of swords. Jon watched his wife, the queen, a soft admiration in his gaze. In her eyes, he saw the glimmer of resolve that first drew him to her. Yet it was gentle now, illuminated by compassion. She caught him staring, a small curve to her lips. "You look as though you want to say something," she said. He placed his hand over hers on the table. "Only that I'm grateful. Grateful you gave up the Iron Throne when you could have taken it by fire and blood. Grateful you listened to me, to Tyrion, to all those who wanted something besides endless war." She leaned into his touch. "I used to dream of taking back the throne, of the Targaryen banner flying over King's Landing once more. I thought I would feel complete. But the more steps I took down that path, the more I realized I was looking for a home, not just a throne. These people deserve better than a queen enthroned by dragonfire. And she took a small breath. I deserve better than to be only a conqueror." Jon smiled faintly, his mind flickering back to their flight on Drogon through Winterfell's skies. They had soared above the clouds, and for a moment he felt what it was to be free. Perhaps in forging a future built on peace, they could offer that freedom to everyone. "We all deserve better," he whispered. They parted ways for the day's tasks. Jon found himself walking alongside Brienne, heading toward the barracks of the City Watch. In the wake of so much conflict, it was crucial to keep the Gold Cloaks disciplined and loyal to the realm's interests rather than the highest bidder. Under King's Landing's new order, the City Watch would answer jointly to the King and Queen, no more corrupt captains in the pockets of powerful lords. It would take time and careful management to weed out old ways, but that was a price worth paying. The yard outside the barracks was bustling with recruits. Brienne observed with an eagle's eye as they drilled in formation. She corrected a young recruit's posture, her authoritative tone a testament to the many years she had practiced the art of swordplay. Jon stepped forward to speak with the watch commander, an older man named Ryman Trant, no relation to the disgraced Ser Marin Trant. Ryman had come up from the ranks, a plain man who wanted only to protect his home and earn a fair wage. "Your Grace," Ryman acknowledged Jon with a respectful dip of his head. "We're short on supplies, but we're working with what we have. The men respect the new order, most of them anyway. The rest, well, we're sorting out the bad eggs." Jon appreciated Ryman's candor. "Let me know what you need. We can't have a city watch that's poorly equipped." "We'll manage, sire. The people are beginning to trust us again. We just need more time." Jon nodded, giving Brienne a small gesture. She towered over the recruits, imparting her stern guidance. The men, wary at first, were growing to respect her expertise in arms. Change was inevitable, and though it unsettled many, a woman of her prowess leading them was a clear sign that this was not the old King's Landing. Maybe that uneasy acceptance was the first step toward real progress. A memory surfaced in Jon's mind. He recalled the night before the great battle at Winterfell, when men and women from all corners of Westeros stood shoulder to shoulder, knowing they faced death. They had shared their songs and stories, their hopes and regrets. In that night, all lines blurred, Northmen and Dothraki, Unsullied and free folk, Lady Brienne and the Hound. The living were united in their common cause. The question now was whether the living could remain united in the face of peace, a test that often proved more elusive than war. When midday arrived, Jon returned to the Red Keep, climbing the stairs to the topmost floors to catch a breath of fresh air. From one of the towers, he could see out over the city. The serpentine streets were packed with people going about their lives, merchants hawking wares, fishmongers shouting at passers-by, children weaving between wagons, laughter echoing. It felt almost normal. It was not the city he had seen on his first arrival, rife with the threat of Lannister soldiers and the stench of rotting refuse. This King's Landing still bore the scars of the past, but new construction was everywhere. Scaffolding braced walls and roofs, rubble cleared from the roads, patches of bright paint on newly rebuilt homes. He caught sight of Drogon in the distance, gliding lazily through the sky beyond the city walls. The great black dragon had grown, though he looked leaner than he once had, perhaps from the battles, perhaps from the grief that burned in Daenerys when she lost Regal. Drogon soared effortlessly, a silent guardian overhead. Jon sometimes wondered how long a dragon's memory might be, whether Drogon too had changed, not merely in size and scale but in spirit. There was no war left to fight, and in that absence, the dragon seemed calmer, though not docile. Even from afar, Jon felt a thrill at the sight of him. He remembered what it was to fly on Regal's back, to feel that surge of awe and kinship. A son of ice and fire, indeed. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Arya. His sister, no, his cousin, though that distinction felt meaningless, had arrived unannounced 2 days earlier. She had roamed far and wide since the war ended, seeking no lords, no titles, just her freedom on the open seas. Arya had come for the wedding, standing quietly at the back of the ceremony with Ghost at her side. Jon was unspeakably grateful to see her again, to know she was safe. She moved with a cat-like grace, silent but present, her eyes sharp. "You're staring at the city," Arya said, her voice light. "At least you're not brooding in some dark corridor." Jon smiled crookedly. "I brood where I must. King's prerogative." Arya gave a rare smile in return. She stepped to the edge, looking down at the rooftops. "Never thought I'd see the day my brother sat on the throne with a dragon queen as his wife." "It's strange to me too," he admitted. "But it's a good kind of strange, I think." She nodded, quiet for a moment. "There's a calm settling on the city, you can almost feel it. People aren't cowering anymore. They're learning to live again." "That's all I want," Jon said, meaning it wholeheartedly. "For people to have a chance at a life without fear." Arya studied him. "And what about you? Are you happy, Jon?" He paused, thinking carefully. "I think I might be. Dany and I, we share the same goal. We've both lost so much. But we found each other, found something worth holding on to. And I have you and Sansa family. We're not at each other's throats like the families that have ruled before. Yes, I'm happy in my own way." Her gaze flickered. "Good. You deserve it." She stepped away from the edge. "I'll be leaving soon." Jon's face clouded. "Leaving so soon? You only just arrived." Arya shrugged, restless energy in her stance. "I've stayed in one place long enough. There's more of the world to see. I came to see your wedding, to know you were well." And now she looked out toward the harbor. "I have a ship waiting for me. I'm heading west of Westeros. See what's there." He breathed a resigned sigh. "When will I see you again?" She offered a cryptic smile, her eyes holding a fondness that only manifested for those she truly loved. "Who knows? Maybe never. But you'll be here, building a new world. And I'll be out there, finding my own place. That's how it's always been. We'll carry each other in our hearts." He put a hand on her shoulder, then pulled her into a fierce hug. "Be safe," he whispered. She returned the embrace just as fiercely, then released him. "Give my regards to Dany. She's not so bad, I suppose." With that, Arya slipped away like a shadow in the midday sun. Jon stood there, leaning against the stone battlements, thinking of how far they had come. A bastard and an exiled princess, now king and queen, with the youngest Stark girl wandering the far corners of the world. Once, the fate of the entire realm had been pinned on swords and alliances, on deceptions and betrayals. Now it was pinned on new roads, farmland, trade routes, and quiet acts of compassion. It was a slower, more patient war, this war against the legacy of fear and distrust. Jon found it suited him better. He descended from the tower and sought out Daenerys once more, finding her in the nursery corridor of the keep. They had repurposed these chambers from the days of the Targaryen kings, rooms that had once housed royal babes. Now they stood mostly empty, but Daenerys oversaw preparations to host orphans of war. A broad hallway connected rooms set with modest beds, toys handcrafted by local carpenters, and a staff of caregivers from the faith and the unsullied. She believed no child should walk the streets in hunger or fear. This was not mere benevolence for show. Daenerys herself had been orphaned, alone in the world with only a brother who cared more for crowns than for her well-being. She knew all too well the vulnerability of children. He watched from the doorway as Daenerys knelt beside a young boy, no older than 4 or 5, with wide brown eyes. She cradled a small wooden dragon in her palm, showing it to him and speaking in a gentle tone. The boy hesitated, but his gaze lingered on the dragon with wonder. Slowly, he reached out, touching its carved wings. Jon could not help the ache in his heart, imagining what might have become of that boy if left to fend for himself in the alleyways of King's Landing. The boy suddenly glanced up, noticing Jon. There was a flicker of fear, perhaps from seeing a tall, broad-shouldered man in black leathers. But Daenerys gently turned him back to the toy. Soft words of comfort carried in the corridor. Jon stepped closer, kneeling beside them. "Hello there," he said quietly, uncertain if the child might speak. The boy glanced at Daenerys, who nodded encouragingly. "It's all right, sweetling," she said. Finally, the boy mustered a small voice. "Hello." Jon offered a smile, though a piece of him felt unsteady. Caring for children was not something he'd ever had the chance to do. "What's your name?" "Merrick," the boy murmured. "Merrick," Jon repeated softly. "That's a strong name." He reached out a hand, palm up, waiting. Slowly, Merrick placed the wooden dragon into Jon's hand. The craft was simple, but well done, the grooves carefully etched. Jon moved it back toward Merrick, who took it and clutched it to his chest. Daenerys caught Jon's eye, warmth in her expression. She rose, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder and gesturing for one of the caregivers, a woman from the faith, to lead him to a room where other children were learning to read. The boy walked off, glancing over his shoulder once, his expression torn between curiosity and shyness. Standing side by side in the corridor, Jon and Daenerys walked on, glancing through open doorways at the small rows of beds, the parapets of sunlight streaming through the tall windows. It was quiet, but not the hush of dread. Instead, it felt like the hush of healing. "You're doing good work here," Jon said, keeping his voice low to avoid disturbing the children. She nodded. "If we can't protect the most helpless among us, then all these promises of a better world are worthless." He couldn't argue. For a moment, the picture of her as a mother formed in his mind, her arms cradling a child of their own, a silver-haired boy or girl, half Targaryen, half Stark. The notion stilled him, a tremor of warmth flooding his chest. He had never truly imagined fatherhood for himself, never believed he'd have that chance. He had the Night's Watch, he had the war, and he was the bastard of Winterfell. But now, everything was different. Daenerys must have sensed his lingering stare. She turned, meeting his eyes, searching his expression. "What is it?" He hesitated, pressing his lips into a faint smile. "Nothing, just proud of you." Her eyebrows arched slightly, as though she suspected more, yet she let it rest. "Come," she said. "I've been meaning to show you something." They left the nursery corridor, passing through winding hallways until they reached an old chamber. The heavy oak door creaked on its hinges as Daenerys pushed it open. Dust motes swirled in the beams of light from narrow windows. Inside, long shelves were lined with books and scrolls, many decaying from years of neglect. At the center stood a large table with an ancient tome laid open, pages yellowed and flaking. "This was part of the old Targaryen library," Daenerys explained, running her fingers over the worn binding of a nearby volume. "It's been sealed off for decades, maybe longer. I suspect many of these writings haven't been touched since Ares, or even before." Jon eyed the rows of dust-laden tomes, the scrolls tied with ribbons that had long since faded to indistinguishable colors. "We should have Sam come sort through these," he said, a spark of excitement in his otherwise stoic voice. "He'd love it." Daenerys smiled. "That's exactly what I was thinking. There might be knowledge here about governance, about the old dynasties, about dragons. Knowledge that could help us shape this new era." He stepped closer to the table, scanning a page covered in archaic Valyrian script. Daenerys joined him, tracing the letters with one pale finger. Her silver hair slipped forward, and Jon caught a faint scent of salt and jasmine. He tried to decipher a phrase or two with the limited High Valyrian he'd learned from her, but the text was difficult. "We'll have to carefully move them somewhere safe, restore them if we can," Daenerys said, turning a page gingerly. "A new library wing, perhaps, open to scholars. The Citadel may not agree, but I believe knowledge should be shared." Jon nodded. "Too many secrets have caused too much destruction. Let them learn. Let them read of the mistakes of the past so they're not repeated." Daenerys closed the tome, a swirl of dust rising between them. She sneezed, her face flushing momentarily, and Jon smiled at the decidedly unqueenly sound. She laughed softly, half embarrassed, half amused. It's been a while since these halls have seen visitors. He leaned in, brushing a thumb across her cheek, wiping away a trace of dust. She stilled under his touch, gazing up at him. For a moment, the weight of crowns and councils dissolved, and they were simply two people, bound by love. He kissed her gently, the warmth of her lips a reminder that, despite the trials that lay ahead, they had come so far. She kissed him back, a slight tremor in her breath that told him she felt the same. They returned to the corridor, heartened by the quiet sense of discovery. Their footsteps echoed on the stone floors, and a few passing servants bowed hurriedly as they recognized the royal pair. Jon and Daenerys inclined their heads in return, but did not pause in their walk. By late afternoon, the Red Keep bustled with the comings and goings of trade emissaries, northern lords who had traveled to the capital, and ambassadors from foreign lands. House Martell's envoys arrived in the courtyard under the banner of the Rising Sun Spear, hopeful for renewed trade routes and guaranteed independence of Dorne's local governance. Though House Martell had historically kept themselves apart, they recognized the advantage of forging ties with a Targaryen queen who claimed Dornish heritage through her ancestors. Jon watched the proceedings with Daenerys by his side. The envoy bowed low, promising fresh fruit, spices, and the famed Dornish wine in exchange for fair tariffs and the king and queen's assurance that their autonomy would be respected. No demands for hostages. No hidden threats. No talks of war. How different it was from the days when alliances were hammered out with swords behind backs. Tyrion negotiated the details, occasionally turning to ask for a nod from the king or queen. Daenerys listened attentively, reinforcing that she wished Dorne to stand proud among the 7 kingdoms, not subjugated. If there was one region that bristled under the Targaryen rule of old, it was Dorne, and for good reason. Over time, if nurtured by fair pacts, trust might flourish. After the formalities concluded, the Dornish party was escorted to prepared quarters. Many things had changed, but Westerosi courtesy remained. Then came a raven from the Vale with news that Lord Robin Arryn, grown older now, was open to renegotiating the terms of the Vale's involvement in the defense of the realm. A wave of letters and requests overwhelmed Tyrion, who delegated some to Ser Davos. Jon signed more royal edicts in a single afternoon than he had wielded a sword in all the campaigns combined. Governance, he realized, was tedious. But tedium was better than bloodshed. He bore it with as much patience as he could muster. By evening, the flicker of torches illuminated the grand halls of the Red Keep. Jon and Daenerys walked to the feast prepared in the Great Hall. Not a feast of extravagance, those days of constant banquets and tournaments had died with the war, but a meal to welcome new arrivals, to celebrate small victories in rebuilding. The lords and ladies present wore simpler attire, subdued in color, reflecting respect for the hardships the people still endured. Daenerys took her place at Jon's side at a broad table near the front of the hall. Ser Davos, Tyrion, Brienne, and Grey Worm joined them alongside Gendry Baratheon, officially recognized by royal decree as Lord of Storm's End, and a handful of lords from the Riverlands. Platters of roast fowl, fresh bread, and autumn vegetables were shared among them. The conversation was polite, tinted with cautious optimism. Gendry spoke of building new galleys for Storm's End to protect the coast. Lord Royce of the Vale described improvements to the Ares roads so supplies could move more freely. Occasionally, Tyrion interjected a witty remark which drew short laughter and eased any lingering tension. Grey Worm said little but ate methodically, occasionally looking around with that ever-watchful gaze. Jon found his appetite subdued, but he forced himself to eat. The day's events and responsibilities weighed on him, and he knew tomorrow would bring another round of meetings. Daenerys seemed to sense his weariness and placed a hand on his arm beneath the table. The warmth of her touch steadied him. Even in a crowded hall, they found moments of silent support. In that fleeting look, the entire realm slipped away, leaving just the two of them. After the meal, Tyrion stood, raising a cup of wine. "My lords, ladies, and honored guests," he began, his voice carrying through the hall. "We've come a long way from the ashes of war. Let this simple feast serve as a reminder that we stand on the precipice of a new beginning, one carved by the will to rebuild, not the will to destroy. To our king and queen, who, in their union, have brought hope to the realm and a promise of unity." He drank, and the hall followed suit. Jon inclined his head in thanks, and Daenerys, radiant beneath the torchlight, dipped hers as well. Tyrion continued, a wry smile on his lips. "I, for one, am relieved. Peace means more time to drink wine and less time to worry about the next man who wants to chop off my head. And I'm sure many of you share that sentiment." May we have fewer reasons to sharpen our swords and more reasons to fill our cups. The toast ended in a ripple of subdued cheer. Jon took Daenerys' hand, interlacing their fingers as the hall buzzed with renewed conversation. One day, he thought, perhaps the cheer won't be so subdued. Perhaps it will ring loud and unguarded. The realm was still raw from scars that might never fully vanish, but in time, new life would take hold. Later that night, Jon returned to their shared chambers with Daenerys, the fatigue of the day pressing on his shoulders. She stood at the window, gazing out at the flicker of lights in the city below. Drogon was a looming shadow above the walls, roosting somewhere near the scorched remains of the old dragon pit. The faint call of night watchmen drifted through the air. Jon approached her, slipping his arms around her waist, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Tired?" she asked softly, leaning back against his chest. He pressed his lips to her temple. "Aye, but it's a good tired." She turned in his arms, facing him, her expression more vulnerable in the intimacy of their private quarters. "Everything's moving so fast, but I can't help feeling that peace is delicate. One wrong move, one slight to a proud lord, and all this could unravel." Jon nodded, his expression grave. "We can only do our best to hold it together. Listen more, demand less. I trust that the good men and women of Westeros don't truly want more bloodshed." Her eyes darted away for a moment. "But some do. Some have built their power on bloodshed. Even if we hold them at bay, the question remains, for how long?" He gently cupped her chin, guiding her gaze back to his. "Then we'll face that day if it comes. Together. No more secrets between us, no more hidden fears. If we stand united, maybe the realm will follow our example." A soft laugh escaped her, a quiet, trembling sound. "You make it sound so simple." Jon's lips quirked. "I didn't say it would be easy. Only that it's what we have to do." They kissed, a tender moment that dispelled the uncertainty gnawing at the edges of their thoughts. He led her toward the bed, mindful that the day had been long and the night offered them a chance to rest, to find solace in each other's warmth. The flicker of candlelight cast dancing shadows across their figures. He brushed aside her silver hair, trailing soft kisses along her shoulder. She breathed his name, the only name he had ever truly owned, and they sank into the hush of desire that was theirs alone, a realm beyond crowns and councils. Morning came too soon, sunlight piercing through the curtains. Jon stirred, disoriented, then realized Daenerys was already awake. She sat at the edge of the bed, pulling on a robe of pale blue fabric embroidered with subtle Targaryen sigils. Her hair was in gentle disarray from the night's rest. She turned as he moved, a half-smile on her lips. "I thought I might let you sleep," she said. "But Tyrion is already pacing outside with a list of new matters." He groaned softly. "So it begins again." She came to him, pressing a light kiss to his forehead. "We can slip away at midday if we like. Take the horses, ride out of the city for a moment. A small break." Jon's grin was immediate. "I'd like that." They dressed and soon enough found themselves back in the swirl of palace life. Tyrion greeted them with a small flourish of parchment in hand, enumerating issues ranging from roofing tiles for the poorer districts to claims of stolen livestock near the Rose Road. But they handled it with quiet determination. Progress was not made in leaps, but in steady steps, and that suited the king and queen who had seen the horror of leaps into chaos. True to her promise, Daenerys coaxed Jon away at midday. They stole out of the Red Keep's gates on horseback, their guards trailing at a discreet distance. Drogon soared above, always protective but giving them room to roam. The city receded behind them and they rode into the open countryside, the rolling hills of the Crownlands dotted with grazing sheep and small farmsteads. It wasn't the north, but the breeze held the scent of wild grass and freshly tilled earth, and Jon felt his tension ease. They found a secluded spot near a stream where the bank rose to a cluster of trees. The horses drank from the water and Daenerys knelt by the stream, letting the cool current rush over her fingers. Jon dismounted, standing near the water's edge. "It's quiet," she remarked, tilting her head back to the sun. "I forget how peaceful it can be." He knelt beside her, the grass cushioning his knees. "You don't get many days like this when you're queen. I'm glad you let me share it with you." She looked sideways at him, the corner of her mouth quirking. "I was thinking about our future children." Jon's heart gave a small jolt. He had wondered if she might bring it up. "What about them?" She turned her gaze to the rippling stream. "Once I was told I could never have children. I believed the curse for so long, believed I was barren. But you said it might not be true, that the witch's words could have been a lie or a misinterpretation. And now here we are, united, hopeful for the future. Maybe," she hesitated, voice trembling with a fragile longing. "Maybe we have a chance." Jon placed a hand on hers, water droplets slipping between their entwined fingers. He thought of the boy in the nursery, the wonder in those young eyes. He thought of his own lost childhood, longing for recognition, for belonging. If it happens, he began softly, if we're so blessed, then I'll do all in my power to protect them and this realm, so they never have to grow up in the shadow of war like we did. She squeezed his hand, relief mingling with cautious joy in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, for giving me hope. He drew her close, the gentle sound of the stream surrounding them. Drogon's distant roar echoed overhead as if in acknowledgement of the moment. Daenerys closed her eyes, resting against his chest. He stroked her hair, letting his own eyes drift shut, and in that instant, they were no longer king and queen, but two souls found in each other's arms, hearts beating in unison with nature's lullaby. Their respite did not last forever, though. Reality beckoned. By late afternoon, they returned to the city where the swirl of life resumed. In the days and weeks that followed, they continued the dance of governance, noble visits, council sessions, judgments passed down with mercy but firm fairness. The city watch grew more disciplined under Brienne's oversight. Trade routes opened again, with ships bearing goods from Dorne and the Arbor, carrying hope for a prosperous winter. The northern roads saw fewer bandits as word spread that the new king and queen would not turn a blind eye to lawlessness. Sansa wrote from Winterfell, detailing how the rebuilding of the northern strongholds was progressing and how she would soon travel south to attend a council on trade agreements with the Vale and the Riverlands. With each passing day, the people spoke of the king and queen with cautious respect. There were still pockets of resentment, remnants of those who wanted to stir unrest, but their voices were overshadowed by the tangible improvements in daily life. Jon and Daenerys never took that acceptance for granted. They knew well how quickly the tide could turn, but they remained united, working side by side, forging a realm that might endure. In time, Daenerys suggested an audience with the faith of the Seven's highest officials to discuss the future of the Great September's replacement. It had been destroyed, along with the building next to it, in the conflicts that had ravaged King's Landing. The High Sparrow's zealotry had long died, but faith lingered, if more quietly. The people wanted a place to gather, to pray. Jon, though no true adherent of the Seven, recognized the importance of letting the realm practice its beliefs freely. He had seen how fervor could be twisted into fanaticism, but he also saw how faith could bring solace to the troubled. The meeting was arranged in the courtyard of the destroyed September, among rubble and half-built scaffolds. It was a stark reminder that faith, like everything else, must be rebuilt. The new High Septon, a modest man named Maribald the Younger, received the royal pair with humility. He spoke of wanting a simpler place of worship, not as grandiose as the sept that stood before. Daenerys listened, occasionally asking questions about the design and resources needed. Jon signed off on a portion of the royal treasury to fund the initial construction, insisting that the faith also contribute from their own charitable coffers. When the meeting concluded, Maribald thanked them. "May the Seven watch over you both," he said, voice resonating with sincere gratitude. "In all my years, I never imagined a Targaryen would rule the Seven Kingdoms again, let alone with such compassion." Daenerys inclined her head, a glimmer of both pride and humility in her eyes. "We all serve in our own ways, Your Grace." The synergy was not perfect, but it was civil and respectful, a far cry from the rancor of the past. This was the quiet revolution. No battles, no flames, just conversations and negotiations. Jon felt each small success eased the weight on his chest. But the rumble of distant troubles never vanished entirely. Rumors came of a rogue Sel's Word company pillaging villages near the Stormlands borders. Letters from the Iron Islands suggested that not all the captains were content under Queen Yara's moderate approach, whispering of a return to the old way. Daenerys held her peace, refusing to send an army. Instead, she wrote diplomatic letters to Yara, urging cooperation to bring the rebels to heel. Jon dispatched small squads of skilled watchers to protect the affected villages rather than a full legion. They moved carefully, wanting to avoid escalation. To those who had grown up under the banner of war, it seemed an alien approach. The cynics whispered that the king and queen were weak, trying to mollify those who might only respect strength. But gradually, people began to see that strength could lie in restraint. Each time violence was avoided, each time an agreement was forged, the realm learned that it was possible to solve problems without rushing to swords. One afternoon, after a council where the lords of the Crownlands agreed to send their surplus harvest to the north in exchange for future trade benefits, Jon left the Red Keep to walk among the city's streets. He often did so in simple clothing, a hood drawn low to observe the people's conditions firsthand. That day, Daenerys joined him, similarly dressed down. Grey Worm insisted on trailing them at a distance with a handful of Unsullied, and they acquiesced, knowing safety could not be fully neglected. But they moved among the throng of commoners relatively unnoticed. They passed a bakery with lines of customers waiting for fresh loaves. A blacksmith's forge rang with the clank of hammer on metal, forging horseshoes and plowshares rather than swords. Children ran along the cobblestones, playing a game with sticks, their laughter echoing. Daenerys stopped by a stall selling small clay figurines. She picked up a dragon statue, crude but charming, and paid a few coins for it. The stallkeeper, oblivious to her true identity, thanked her profusely, bowing his head. They strolled further, stopping at a modest sept that had been repaired. Inside, a sept attended to the sick and the wounded. Jon saw a battered soldier in the corner, missing a leg from the war. He approached, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. The soldier didn't recognize him, but grumbled that all he wanted was a decent bed and a chance to mend. The septa explained that they were short on medicines, and Daenerys quietly promised to send more from the Red Keep stores. They left, hearts heavy but determined. As they neared the edge of Flea Bottom, they encountered a small group of ragged men. One recognized Daenerys's silver hair despite her hood. Fear flashed in his eyes, but then he bowed awkwardly, fumbling for words of respect. "My queen," he muttered, the others following suit. Jon saw the man's gaunt cheeks, the tattered clothes. War had left many in poverty. Daenerys smiled softly, placing a coin into the man's hand without ostentation. A hush fell over them. She spoke a few words of encouragement, telling them that opportunities to earn wages were coming, that the city was being rebuilt, that they need only come forward and ask for the new work details. The men nodded, half in awe, half in disbelief. As the sun began to set, Jon and Daenerys slipped back into the keep, each lost in thought. They had seen the people's struggles firsthand, the remnants of old wounds. But they had also glimpsed the flicker of optimism. The city felt safer, cleaner, more alive. It was not a utopia, not overnight, but the seeds of change were firmly planted. Late that night, as they lay in bed, Daenerys traced slow circles on Jon's chest, her hair spilling over the sheets like moonlight. She murmured, "Sometimes I wonder if we're just fooling ourselves, thinking we can truly change this place." Jon breathed in, deep and steady. "The realm isn't perfect. It never was. But it's better than it was a year ago, better than it was when we stood on the brink of total destruction." She nodded, pressing closer. "Yes, step by step?" "Step by step," he echoed, closing his eyes. "And if darkness does rise again, we'll face it together." Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. The king and queen's rule solidified, not by oppression, but by earned respect. Delegations arrived regularly, from Bravos seeking to re-establish loans and trade, from the Dothraki Sea, a handful of Khals who had followed Daenerys originally, now curious about this peaceful land across the narrow sea. She greeted them with open arms, showcasing to Jon that bridging cultures was something she had dreamed of. The Dothraki who remained in Westeros had begun to settle near the gift of farmland by the Blackwater, grazing their horses on open grassland. It was a slow assimilation with inevitable tension, but Daenerys and Jon visited them as well, ensuring the Dothraki were given a place and a voice. The small council shaped the realm's direction. Tyrion worked tirelessly, Ser Davos advising on matters of shipping and commerce, Brienne training a new generation of protectors, Grey Worm keeping the peace, and Gendry forging alliances with those who might once have despised a Baratheon in power. The realm took cautious steps toward prosperity. In the north, Sansa's leadership garnered respect from northern lords. She wrote that crops were being planted again, that Winterfell's walls stood stronger than ever. A new trade route with White Harbor was proving lucrative, and the shipments of grain from the Reach had staved off a potential shortage. Brandon Stark remained in Winterfell as well, a quiet overseer of knowledge. Samwell Tarly journeyed between the Citadel and Winterfell and occasionally visited King's Landing, eager to help wherever he could, dreaming of an archive uniting all knowledge in the realm. One late autumn evening, as crisp winds began hinting at an early winter, Jon found Daenerys alone on the balcony overlooking the city. The moonlight made her hair glow like spun silver. He joined her, wrapping a cloak around her shoulders to ward off the chill. Below, King's Landing shimmered under the moonlit sky. There were still the scars of war in the shape of half-rebuilt buildings, but the city no longer wore the cloak of hopelessness. Daenerys looked at him, a gentle question in her gaze. "Jon, do you ever think about the past, about the battles, the fear? Do you regret it? Taking a different path?" He considered her question. "We did what we had to do to survive the long night, to break the chains of old grudges. And now we're here, forging something new. I don't regret that. The dead are gone, and we're alive. We can't bring back those we lost, but we can honor them by making sure we don't repeat the same mistakes." She leaned against him, her voice soft. "Sometimes I feel them, those we lost, like they're watching us. My dragons, Missandei, Yora, your family, our friends. I hope they see what we're trying to do, that it comforts them somehow." Jon pressed his lips to her hair. I'm sure they'd be proud. You've changed so much. We both have. All we can do is keep trying to make it right. She turned, gazing into his eyes. In that moment, a spark passed between them, a silent understanding that, in forging peace, they had also saved themselves. I love you, she whispered. He cradled her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. And I love you. They kissed beneath the moon, high above a city that was learning, day by day, to leave violence behind. Their realm was not perfect. It was fragile, a tapestry woven from threads of trust and compromise, but it was their tapestry, the result of their choice to unite, not conquer. And in that union, they found a reason to believe in tomorrow. As the chill winds of winter approached, rumors spread through the city that the queen carried the air of ice and fire in her womb. No official announcement was made, but whispers grew whenever the queen touched her stomach protectively or when the maester visited her chambers with new remedies and tonics. For many, it was a cause for muted celebration, a living symbol of the future. For Jon and Daenerys, it was both a joyous and terrifying prospect. They had each lost family, each grown up in circumstances that shaped them into survivors. Now they might bring a new life into a kingdom on the mend. In the hush of early dawn, when Daenerys awoke with gentle nausea, Jon helped her steady herself. They shared smiles, half anxious, half radiant. He would press his hand to her abdomen, marveling that a child could grow where once she believed impossible. Daenerys, in turn, teased him that he looked more terrified than any time he faced the dead. But it was not a cruel tease, just a gentle reminder of how everything was shifting again. The city, too, shifted to accommodate them. Advisors began drafting letters to the major houses, ensuring that any child of the king and queen would be recognized as the legitimate heir to the realm. Some older lords balked quietly behind closed doors, another Targaryen line continuing, but they did not speak out openly. The realm had grown tired of conflict, and the last thing any lord wanted was to challenge a stable monarchy that might bring wealth and security for their people. Soon enough, small celebrations sprang up in the streets. Bakers crafted little dragon and direwolf pastries, children sang songs of the King of the North and the Dragon Queen who had saved them from endless night. Jon was privately uncomfortable with the adulation, recalling how easily people's cheers could turn to jeers, but Daenerys reminded him that the people needed hope. If they found it in music, pastry, and gentle gossip, then that was reason enough to let them continue. Night by night, day by day, the tapestry of peace grew stronger. There were still rifts to mend, still corners of the realm in need of guidance. But there was no new war, no fresh wave of bloodshed, and for a land that had known so much turmoil, that was a gift beyond compare. Jon would never have believed, in his days at the Wall, that he might stand here now, husband to the Dragon Queen, father-to-be, king in the south as well as the north. Daenerys, too, had never imagined a path that did not end with her astride a dragon conquering city after city. But life had turned them both into unexpected versions of themselves, forging new identities shaped by compassion, tempered by sacrifice. And so they stood, side by side, upon the ramparts of the Red Keep, looking out over the city one bright morning, just as they had in the earliest dawn of their reign. The sun climbed higher, illuminating red-tiled rooftops and bustling markets. In the distance, the sea shimmered, ships sailing in and out of the harbor, carrying goods instead of soldiers. The gloom that had once hung over King's Landing like a permanent storm had lifted. Daenerys placed a hand over her abdomen and Jon placed his hand gently over hers. They exchanged a glance, hearts full of a hope that still felt fragile but also powerful in its persistence. She leaned her head on his shoulder and he wrapped an arm around her. Drogon's roar echoed on the horizon, a distant benediction. Winter was coming, yes, but so was spring, so was a new generation, a new age. And in that coming age, they would carve out a future free from the burdens of the past, a future in which they might rule not by fear, but by the quiet strength of unity, mercy, and love. There were no more battles to fight, not at this moment, but each day was a gentle struggle to preserve what they had built. They had found a peace more precious than gold, more delicate than glass. With steady hands, guided by a promise to each other and to the people they protected, Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen shaped the destiny of Westeros into something it had never been before, a realm determined to heal instead of harm. And in that realm, for the first time in their lives, they dared to believe in the simple, unassailable truth that joy could last. No war. Only the slow, patient blossoming of trust. And high above, the last living dragon soared over a city that did not cower, but instead looked up with awe and a budding sense that, at long last, the promise of a better world had taken flight. He could still recall the first true snowfall that blanketed King's Landing. It was only a light dusting, nothing compared to the vast drifts he had known in the north, but it brought a hush over the city nonetheless. The grand capital, accustomed to the sticky heat and temperate breezes of southern climes, now found itself shivering under gray skies. People huddled closer inside their cloaks, merchants lit extra braziers in their stalls, and children, wide-eyed with wonder, raced to catch flurries on their tongues. Some wondered if this was an omen, a sign from both the old gods and the new that the realm was truly changing. Jon Snow, the king who had once worn black for the Night's Watch, stood at a window in the Red Keep, gazing down at the courtyard where men of the City Watch patrolled on an icy morning. He wore heavier leathers lined with furs reminiscent of the north. It was cold, but nowhere near as brutal as the frozen gales of Winterfell. Still, the sight stirred memories of lonely battlements on the wall, the long nights he spent keeping vigil under a frozen moon. The realm was at peace now, or near enough, but his instincts never let him grow complacent. Behind him, Daenerys Targaryen was seated on a cushioned chair, reviewing a stack of letters. Her silver hair was braided to keep it from falling into her face, and beneath her gown, the gentle swell of her belly was unmistakable. She was with child, a child of ice and fire, as Tyrion jokingly called it when the hand was in one of his lighter moods. Daenerys had not lost any of her regal presence, though pregnancy had softened her features. She radiated a quiet determination these days, no longer the fierce conqueror consumed by iron thrones and birthrights. A knock came at the door. Ser Davos Seaworth entered, giving a short bow. "Your Graces, the council is assembled." Jon tore his gaze from the winter-swept courtyard and offered Daenerys his arm. She rose, setting aside the letters. Requests for aid in the outlying districts, a note from Lady Sansa in Winterfell, trade proposals from Dorne, and allowed him to guide her. Though she moved with that same stately grace, Jon could feel the subtle weariness in her steps. The child was due in only a few months, and the demands of the court weighed heavily on her. The small council chamber had changed since the days of the Iron Throne. A broad, round table occupied the center, with high-backed chairs arrayed so all could see each other. The map of Westeros stretched across the tabletop, detailed, updated, a testament to the realm they now nurtured. Tyrion Lannister usually sat at Daenerys' right, but he was absent this morning, having departed on a diplomatic mission to the Vale. Still, Ser Davos was present, along with Grey Worm, Brienne of Tarth, Lady Meredith of Tarth, the new Master of Laws, and Maester Ormond. A handful of newer advisors representing the growing alliances with Dorne and the Stormlands also stood by. "Good morning," Daenerys said as she settled into her seat, voice calm but firm. "Shall we begin?" Ser Davos cleared his throat. "Aye, Your Grace. Several matters require your attention. First, the relief efforts in the poorer districts seem to be working. Grain prices have stabilized thanks to the subsidies, and the black market activity has lessened. Tyrion's men have uncovered a handful of smugglers who were diverting flour shipments, but that's been addressed." Jon nodded. "That's welcome news. Have we enough surplus to continue subsidies for the rest of winter?" Maester Ormond shuffled his parchment. "Yes, Your Grace, but just barely. The Treasury can handle it for a few more months, perhaps. We'll need additional revenue in the spring. The trade route expansions Lord Tyrion is working on should help." Brienne spoke next, her voice level. "Regarding the City Watch, recruitment has gone well. The new code of conduct is being followed and disciplinary issues are at a record low. However, we have had complaints from a few lords about the presence of the Unsullied in certain city patrols." She glanced at Grey Worm. The stoic commander inclined his head. "The Unsullied follow orders. We do not harass the populace. But some lords claim they feel uneasy." Daenerys' mouth tightened. "Uneasy that disciplined soldiers protect the city equally, no doubt. Let them complain if they wish. As long as no laws are broken, the Unsullied remain an integral part of the peacekeeping force." Brienne nodded. "Yes, Your Grace." Davos moved on to the next item. The Dothraki visitors remain settled outside the city. Kalnaras has been cooperative, respecting local farms and laws. They've taken to trading with the small folk, exchanging their woven goods and cured meats for Westerosi steel and produce. Some in the city are wary, but there have been no major incidents. We've successfully avoided conflict. Jon thought back to the last time he visited the Dothraki camp. The sight of so many horses, the scent of open fires, the ring of foreign laughter, it was an odd thing to see so near King's Landing. But the Dothraki had sworn loyalty to Daenerys once, and so long as they felt respected, they held to it. "Ensure that lines of communication remain open," he said. "We don't want misunderstandings." Grey Worm nodded, making a note. "Yes, Your Grace." They continued through other matters: a small outbreak of fever in a nearby village that needed fresh water supplies, the repair of city walls in preparation for any future threat, the ongoing negotiations with Bravos for a loan to improve roads throughout the Crownlands. The discussion was methodical, lacking Tyrion's sharp wit, but it moved swiftly. At last, the session drew to a close. The king and queen signed a new directive to expand the city's infirmaries, then dismissed the council. Brienne and Davos lingered to speak with Jon about the best route for sending a small group of knights to the north, ensuring the roads were passable in winter. Daenerys, feeling the press of exhaustion, excused herself. Jon's eyes followed her as she left, flanked by a pair of loyal guards. Concern flickered in his gaze. It was no secret she was pushing herself even as the child grew. But she was Daenerys Targaryen, and rest had never come easily to her. He finished conferring with Davos and Brienne, concluding that the knights would depart in a week's time. Then he hurried after Daenerys, catching up with her near the Keep Solar. "Are you well?" he asked in a low voice, offering his arm. She pressed a hand to her back, which clearly ached. "Tired, but I'm fine. The council sessions take more out of me than I anticipated. I'm not used to feeling this heavy." Jon's expression softened. "Perhaps you should rest, even if only for an hour or two." She gave a short laugh. "An hour of rest seems a treasure these days. We'll see. I still have letters to read, Sansa, Gendry, messages from Yara." He brushed a strand of silver hair from her forehead. "Let me handle some of them. I can read them, Summarize, and you can decide what needs your attention. Just rest for now. The realm won't crumble if you close your eyes for a little while." Reluctantly, Daenerys agreed. He escorted her to her chambers, where a waiting maid brought tea scented with mint and chamomile. When Daenerys settled onto a couch, Jon took a seat by the hearth, letters in hand. He read quietly, occasionally glancing up to see if she was drifting off. She tried to fight it, but soon her eyelids grew heavy and she fell asleep to the gentle crackle of the fire. Jon continued reviewing the letters. Sansa's was pleasant, detailing how the northern outposts fared in the deep snows. She praised the support Winterfell had received from the crown, mentioning Brienne's earlier aid in quelling banditry. Gendry Baratheon's letter spoke of shipbuilding at Storm's End, an ambitious project to create patrol vessels for the crown's navy. Yara's message was succinct, stating that the Iron Islands remained free of pirate threats after her recent campaign to eliminate rogue captains, though the winter seas were nearly impossible to navigate. He wrote brief responses, feeling the curious blend of relief and caution. Relief that the realm stood mostly at peace. Caution because he knew how quickly fortunes changed. If the long night had taught him anything, it was that complacency could be fatal. When Daenerys stirred, more than an hour had passed. She blinked, momentarily disoriented. Jon moved closer, offering her a warm hand. "You slept well?" he asked. She stretched gingerly. "Better than I expected. Thank you." Her gaze fell on the letters stacked neatly on the table. "So you handled them?" He nodded, summarizing the contents. "Nothing urgent. Sansa sends her regards. Gendry's building ships. Yara's seas are dangerous as ever, but under control." Daenerys exhaled softly. "That's good news, all of it." A moment of silence passed as she regarded him, a fondness in her eyes. "You're a better ruler than you realize, Jon Snow." He gave a quiet shrug. "I have good advisors. And a good queen by my side." She took his hand, a spark of warmth in her voice. "Our child will have a chance at life without constant war. That alone is worth every sleepless hour." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Yes, it is." That evening, they dined quietly in their private rooms, choosing a simple meal of roasted vegetables, bread, and a bit of fish. Daenerys had little appetite, something that came and went in waves, but the maester had emphasized the need to keep her strength up. Jon encouraged her to eat while he relayed minor news from the city, the blacksmith's guild forging new plow blades, a traveling troupe of musicians that had arrived from the free cities, a rumor that the spring rains might come early. Afterward, they strolled through a dim corridor to the nursery wing, where they often visited the orphans Daenerys had taken under her protection. Even at this late hour, a few of the older children were still awake, reading by lantern light. One boy, perhaps 10, had a fresh bruise on his chin, the result of a scuffle with another child. Daenerys took time to speak with him, calm and comforting, reminding him that violence solved nothing. The boy's eyes brimmed with tears as he apologized for fighting over a borrowed wooden sword. Jon watched, quietly moved. These small moments were the real building blocks of a gentler future. They retired for the night, finding solace in each other's arms against the hush of winter outside. Even the mighty red keep felt smaller in the stillness, as though the thick stone walls themselves wanted to rest. Jon closed his eyes, drifting off with Daenerys' soft breathing in his ear, lulled by the knowledge that for tonight, at least, the city was safe. In the weeks that followed, the faint chill that hung in the air deepened and the mornings dawned with thick mist rolling off Blackwater Bay. The city adapted to the cold, lighting more fires, bundling in thicker cloaks, learning to function in weather that rarely blessed the southern capital. Yet despite the hardships of winter, the people pressed on, merchants opened their stalls, blacksmiths hammered in the forges, and children found wonder in every small flurry of snow. Jon awoke early each morning, shrugging on his layered furs and meeting with Ser Davos or Brienne to organize relief measures for the poorest districts. Daenerys, too, rose with him, though her energy flagged as her pregnancy advanced. She would not be idle, however. In the late mornings, she oversaw the staff in the keep's nursery, ensuring the war orphans had enough bedding, clothing, and a hot meal. By midday, she often attended smaller audiences, receiving merchants, minor lords, or city guild representatives in a more casual setting than the throne room. Her gentle but firm approach gradually won over many who had once been skeptical of a Targaryen queen. Still, as winter's cold wore on, new troubles came to light. A rumor of thefts from the royal granaries reached the council, prompting Tyrion, before he left for the Vale, to dispatch informants to Flea Bottom. Some smuggling ring was capitalizing on the high demand for grain and flour, selling stolen goods at inflated prices. Rather than clamp down with brute force, Jon and Daenerys agreed on subsidizing basic food costs for the city, hoping to undercut the black market's profits. Tyrion's spies soon caught the ringleaders, and though the lords grumbled at the expense, the policy kept the peace. Beyond King's Landing, news trickled in. Sansa's letters from Winterfell spoke of harsh storms, but also of cooperation between the northern lords and the small group of knights Brienne had left behind. The dreaded bandits had not resurfaced, deterred by the crown-backed defenses. Yara Greyjoy confirmed that she had hunted down a final band of rogue Ironborn pirates near Pike. The Iron Islands acknowledged the king and queen but maintained their own ways and traditions, an uneasy truce that nevertheless held. Dorne's envoys brought word of promising trade developments. Ships from Sunspear docked regularly, carrying spices, fruits, and the famed Dornish wines, revitalizing trade in the capital. Every letter seemed to confirm the realm's tenuous but enduring peace, a peace Daenerys and Jon guarded fiercely. Each day, Daenerys felt her child move more within her. She would pause in the corridor, placing a hand on her rounded belly, and Jon would catch her eye with a look of awe that never faded. Sometimes she recalled the witch's curse from years ago that she would never bear a living child, and a tremor of gratitude would pass through her, mixed with lingering doubt. But each reassuring kick reminded her that curses and prophecies did not control her fate. Word soon spread of a new menace on the horizon, a sickness in Old Town. Archmaester Ambrose wrote that it caused fever, coughing fits, and delirium. Fearing it might spread along trade routes, Daenerys and Jon swiftly set up quarantine protocols for travelers arriving from the southwestern coasts. Maester Ormond worked with city healers to establish isolated wards in unused dungeons below the keep, preparing for any influx of the ill. Some merchants complained bitterly about the restrictions, but the king and queen refused to yield. Better inconvenience than plague. Weeks passed, and fortunately, the disease did not flare into a full epidemic in the capital. Reports from Old Town suggested the Citadel had contained the outbreak at its source. Daenerys, who remembered the suffering in Meereen when illness swept the slums, breathed a sigh of relief. She had insisted on vigilance, and it seemed to pay off. Meanwhile, a sense of everyday life took root in King's Landing. The Gold Cloaks patrolled, well-trained and relatively fair compared to the corruption of old. Street performers braved the cold, entertaining passers-by with juggling and puppet shows near the market squares. In the taverns, travelers shared tales of how calm the realm felt: no major wars, no monstrous invasions, no tyrants scorching cities with dragon fire. A fragile calm, perhaps, but calm nonetheless. One chilly day, Daenerys accompanied Jon outside the city walls to observe a Dothraki competition, a friendly gathering of riders who tested their archery skills at full gallop. Rows of spectators, small folk and minor lords alike, lined a marked field. Bonfires crackled, vendors sold hot drinks, and the breath of horses steamed in the frosty air. Daenerys stood on a wooden platform, cloaked heavily, as a Dothraki rider charged down the track, loosing arrows with uncanny precision. Cheers and gasps rippled through the crowd when the arrows thudded into distant targets. Khalnaras approached afterward, bowing low to the Dragon Queen. He announced that more riders from Essos might come in the spring, drawn by rumors of a queen who commanded dragons yet fostered peace. Daenerys smiled and replied that they would be welcome provided they obeyed the realm's laws. The melding of cultures was not always simple, but every successful event like this eased the tension. Jon, watching by her side, felt a cautious optimism. Each time the Dothraki integrated a bit more, trading goods, taking part in these friendly contests, the city's fear diminished. More than once, he caught glimpses of local children gazing wide-eyed at the Dothraki horses, or men in the crowd muttering that these warriors were not so different from Westerosi knights. Slowly, the line between us and them blurred. The day ended without incident, the Dothraki riders departing with victory cheers. Daenerys felt the crisp air tiring her, and Jon helped her onto a horse for the short ride back. It was not the legendary silver she once rode across the Dothraki Sea, but she felt a pang of nostalgia anyway. She recalled her younger self, dauntless, hungry to reclaim the Iron Throne at any cost. Now she saw the world differently. She had found a home in a realm she once intended to conquer by fire. The idea filled her with a gentle determination. Peace was harder to nurture than war, but infinitely more precious. As winter dragged on, the nights stretched longer, and candlelit corridors in the Red Keep glowed well before supper. Jon took to walking the city's streets incognito at times, wearing a simple hooded cloak and carrying only a short blade. Grey Worm insisted on shadowing him with a few unsullied, albeit at a distance. Jon wanted to see how the people fared without the filter of courtiers or guardsmen. He witnessed street performers entertaining with battered lutes and old songs of heroes. He saw a group of blacksmiths forging plowshares instead of swords, a testament to shifting priorities. At one corner, he found a small sept newly repaired where a septa fed the sick with meager rations. Jon discreetly slipped her a handful of coins for medicine. A man missing a leg from war injuries sat near the brazier, ex-soldier's cloak pulled tight, but he offered a salute when he realized who Jon was. These sights heartened Jon. The realm was not perfect, poverty still clung to corners, and occasional criminals lurked in shadows, but progress was undeniable. No one brandished a sword at him, no one spat curses. More often, he saw a flicker of recognition and the hush that followed when someone muttered, "That's the king," or simply "Snow." He found humility in those interactions, as well as resolve to continue guiding Westeros toward stability. Meanwhile, Daenerys slowed her public appearances as her pregnancy advanced. She entrusted more day-to-day matters to Jon, Davos, and Lady Meredith. Yet whenever pressing issues arose, she stepped up with the same unwavering presence she displayed on battlefields past. The memory of her old self, the frightened girl sold to Khal Drogo, the mother of dragons who'd freed Slaver's Bay, intertwined with the calm queen she was now. Each facet of her history reminded her that leading through compassion could be as mighty as any conquest. Finally, as the darkest stretch of winter approached its end, subtle changes hinted at the coming thaw. The days seemed a touch longer, sunlight lingering just enough to cast warm streaks across the courtyards. Ice on the Blackwater Bay cracked under midday sun. In the outlying fields, patches of brown earth emerged from receding snow. People began speaking of the new season with cautious hope. Amid these signs of approaching spring, a raven arrived from the Vale. Tyrion Lannister wrote that negotiations with Lord Robin Arryn had gone well. The Vale agreed to open mountain passes for trade with the north, enabling crucial shipments of grain to circumvent dangerous roads. Tyrion's letter exuded satisfaction and relief at leaving the dizzying heights of the Eyrie behind. Davos appended his own note praising Tyrion's skillful diplomacy. They would soon return to King's Landing with good news. The realm stirred at word of this success. One more piece of the puzzle slid into place, forging tighter bonds among regions once divided by grudges and distances. When the day arrived for Tyrion and Davos to ride back through the gates, they were met by cheers from the small folk who sensed that the monarchy's efforts promised tangible benefits for everyone. Tyrion, ever the showman, waved graciously, while Davos smiled and held his reins with steady composure. That evening, the Red Keep hosted a modest reception in their honor. Jon stood by Daenerys as they welcomed Tyrion and Davos in the Great Hall, no longer the seat of fear or grandeur it once was, but a place of communal celebration. Musicians played softly, and tables were laid with winter vegetables, fresh bread, and spiced wine. Courtiers mingled with merchant representatives, Dothraki envoys, and knights from across Westeros. The atmosphere was one of tentative festivity, an acknowledgement of what had been achieved under Daenerys and Jon's joint rule. Tyrion was first to speak, Your graces, allow me to present the fruits of our labor in the Vale. He handed over a scroll bearing the Vale's seal. Lord Aaron has agreed to construct trade routes through the mountains, linking the Riverlands, the North, and even the Crownlands. This will accelerate commerce and aid in times of famine or crisis. Davos nodded, stepping forward. We traveled the mountain roads in deep winter. It was no small feat, but the Vale remains welcoming, and they admire what's happening here. This unity we're forging. They want to be a part of it, not stand aside. Daenerys accepted the scroll, her eyes shining. Thank you, both of you. This realm grows stronger with every bridge we build. Jon gave Tyrion a grateful look. Your cunning has done us all a service. Tyrion grinned. I do my best work when my head isn't on the chopping block. Soft laughter rippled through the hall, diffusing tension. As cups were raised in a toast, Jon felt Daenerys grip his arm with quiet excitement. One more region had embraced the new order. Their child would inherit not a realm shattered by old rivalries, but one steadily weaving itself together. There was still a long road ahead, but the path felt more hopeful than ever. During the reception, Daenerys slipped away momentarily, finding a cool balcony to catch her breath. The noise of conversation and music drifted behind her, muted by thick stone walls. She rested a hand on her abdomen, sensing the child's movements. Though her ankles ached and her back felt tight, she reveled in the closeness of this life within. Jon soon joined her, gently placing a fur-lined cloak over her shoulders. You should be inside, warm, he murmured. She leaned against the railing, the night breeze brushing her face. I needed a moment. Too many voices at once. He nodded, standing beside her. Below, the city lights twinkled in the crisp darkness. Ships at anchor in the bay rocked gently, lanterns glowing in the harbor. I remember when I first came here, Jon said softly. I thought the city was a pit of snakes, overshadowed by Lannisters and war. But now he glanced at her, a hint of amazement in his eyes. Now it feels like a place worth saving. Daenerys turned, meeting his gaze. We saved it, Jon. Together. It isn't just that we ended a war, we ended a cycle. A cycle of fear, ambition, and vengeance. She touched her belly. Our child will know a different world. He cupped her cheek, brushing aside a silver strand. A world we'll keep safe. For them, for all of us. They stood there in companionable silence, the hush of the night embracing them. A faint roar drifted from above Drogon, perched on a distant turret, as ever watchful. Daenerys smiled. Even the dragon seemed gentler these days, though he remained a fierce presence none dared challenge. Like the realm itself, Drogon had adapted to peacetime, no longer an engine of war but a symbol of House Targaryen's enduring legacy. At length, Jon guided Daenerys back inside, where Tyrion was regaling a small audience with tales of the Aerys' dizzying heights and near-death experiences. Cups were refilled, bread was broken, and the mood remained light. Such simple gatherings, absent of fear and hidden agendas, were a welcome novelty in King's Landing. Days passed, winter's stranglehold slowly loosening. The couple's routine continued, morning councils, midday audiences, letters and dispatches from across the land, afternoons devoted to the city's welfare or visits to outlying wards. Daenerys' pregnancy advanced further. The maester believed she would give birth near the first bloom of spring. She tired more quickly, but her resolve never wavered. Jon, sensitive to her needs, took on additional duties. Their closeness deepened in those days, forging a partnership that balanced strength and empathy. One afternoon, as Daenerys rested in a comfortable chair by a window, she received a letter sealed with the Stark sigil. She broke the seal to find Sansa's elegant handwriting. The Lady of Winterfell spoke of the snowpack finally softening in the north. She expressed her eagerness for Jon and Daenerys to visit once the child was born. The letter ended with a note that Brandon Stark, Bran, the three-eyed raven, remained quiet in Winterfell's Godwood, yet had mentioned in his cryptic way that the realm stands at a turning point, but hope endures. Daenerys showed the letter to Jon. He read it quietly, considering Sansa's invitation. She wants us to come north after the babe is born, he said, a gentle light in his eyes. Maybe we'll present them to the old gods as well as the new. Daenerys pictured Winterfell's ancient weirwood, its red leaves and pale bark. She had only briefly glimpsed it, never truly seen it in peace. I'd like that, she said. This child carries both Targaryen and Stark blood. It feels right to honor both sides. Jon nodded, a smile ghosting across his features. Sansa will be a doting aunt, I'm sure. And Arya, wherever she is now, she'll show up sooner or later. Bran will watch with his quiet knowledge. We'll be together again, but under clear skies instead of a looming storm of the dead. Time rolled on, the final stretch of winter giving way to early thaw. Snow still fell now and again, but patches of slush appeared in the streets by midday, and traveling merchants spoke of the roads growing passable. The city thrummed with anticipation. Farmers prepared for planting, markets stocked new goods, and rumors of blossoming fields in the reach offered a glimpse of the plenty to come. Daenerys woke one morning, an ache in her lower back and a heaviness that told her the child might not wait much longer. Maester Ormond examined her, pronouncing her in good health, though cautioning, "Gee, that birth could come any day, or perhaps take a few more weeks yet." Nervous excitement filled the Red Keep. Jon canceled non-essential meetings, ensuring he would be at her side whenever the moment arrived. And at last, in the hush before dawn on a day tinged with spring's gentle scent, Daenerys felt the first true pangs of labor. She had risen from bed with a restless energy, walking the corridor for fresh air. Then the pain surged, undeniable. She managed to call out, and within moments, servants, midwives, and maesters bustled around her. Jon appeared, startled from half-sleep, his eyes wide with both awe and alarm. The hours that followed felt suspended in time. Daenerys was moved to a prepared chamber, the same nursery suite that once housed Targaryen heirs generations ago. Midwives flitted about, boiling water, bringing fresh linens, offering sips of cool tea to soothe her parched throat. The old curses and fears scratched at her mind, but she pushed them away. She was no stranger to hardship, no stranger to pain. And she had Jon's hand to grip, his calm voice in her ear telling her she was strong, that all would be well. Outside, the sun rose over King's Landing, gilding the Red Keep's towers in gold. Word spread quickly among the court, the Queen is in labor. The corridors filled with hushed whispers, anxious prayers, and the occasional roar of Drogon, who sensed his rider's distress. Guards stood at attention, awaiting any order. Tyrion and Davos waited outside the birthing chamber, glancing at one another with an unspoken tension, recalling all the perils of childbirth in Westeros. Still, they clung to hope. Inside, time blurred. Daenerys felt waves of pain, her breath ragged. She clutched Jon's hand, her nails digging into his skin as he murmured reassurances. The midwives instructed her to push, to breathe, to hold on. It felt like a battle, but one with no sword in hand, just raw, primal will. Then at last, the piercing wail of a newborn filled the room. Daenerys collapsed back against the pillows, sweat-soaked and trembling. Jon's throat constricted as he stared at the tiny, squalling bundle in the midwife's arms, hardly believing what he saw. A living child, his child, their child, pink-faced and loud, with a fuzz of dark hair on its head. The midwife smiled broadly. "A boy, your graces, a strong, healthy boy." She held him out, and Jon carefully took the infant. Tears blurred his vision as he gazed at the wrinkled little face, then turned to Daenerys, who watched through half-lidded eyes, exhausted but alight with relief. She reached out, and Jon placed the babe in her arms. The child's cries quieted as Daenerys cradled him, tears slipping down her cheeks. She glanced at Jon with a breathless laugh, and the two of them shared a look of wonder so profound it eclipsed every victory, every coronation. This was their greatest triumph, life in a land once consumed by death. Outside, Tyrion and Davos heard the newborn's cries and let out a collective breath. The news spread, soon echoing through the Red Keep and beyond. The Queen has delivered a prince, healthy and alive, a new Targaryen Stark heir to the realm. In the city below, bells tolled in celebration, and people rejoiced, from the grandest noble to the humblest tradesman, for a royal birth symbolizing a future free of the burdens of endless war. When Daenerys had been tended to and the babe wrapped in soft linens, Jon sat on the edge of the bed, watching mother and child with reverence. The boy's eyes fluttered open, an uncertain color that might darken to brown like Jon's or hold some trace of violet from Daenerys's lineage. It didn't matter. He was theirs, and he was safe. Daenerys brushed a finger across the infant's cheek. "What shall we call him?" she whispered. Jon's mind darted back to names of the past. Ned, Rhaegar, Aemon. Legacies both cherished and fraught. But looking at Daenerys and their son, he found he wanted something new. Something that blended their stories yet looked to the future. They spent a quiet moment discussing softly, eventually settling on a name that honored both houses without fully echoing any ghost. A name for a boy who would inherit a realm united, not by conquest, but by choice. The midwives and Maester approached again, offering to take the babe so Daenerys could rest. She allowed it, though reluctantly. Jon helped her sip water, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're so strong," he murmured. "Stronger than I've ever been on any battlefield." She smiled, weary but radiant. "We did this together," she said. All of us, the realm, our allies, everyone who believed in peace. This child, he's part of that promise." Jon nodded, heart full. "I'll see to it that he grows up knowing the sacrifices made, the debts owed to those who came before. We'll teach him to protect what we've built." Outside, the sun shone brightly, as though celebrating a new dawn. The atmosphere in King's Landing was electric with joy. The Dothraki riders, upon hearing of the birth, danced and sang around their campfires. The Unsullied stood a little taller at their posts. Bells rang out from septs, and spontaneous feasts erupted in taverns, with small folk lifting cups to toast the newborn prince. As Daenerys drifted toward a healing sleep, Jon stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city. Drogon circled in the sky, letting out a roar that reverberated through stone and bone. Below, throngs of people gathered near the keep's outer walls, hoping for a glimpse or any scrap of news. The realm was no stranger to royal births, but seldom had a birth felt so symbolic. An heir born of Stark and Targaryen, under a reign that had ended the nightmares of the Long Night and the tyranny of old feuds. Jon closed his eyes, feeling the sun's warmth on his face. In his mind, he saw the child's future. A world in which the living no longer feared the dead, where men and women of different cultures could stand side by side without hatred. There would still be struggles, there always would be in Westeros, but if they nurtured this peace as they nurtured their son, perhaps that cycle of destruction might stay broken. He remembered standing on the wall, a watchman against the darkness. He remembered kneeling to Daenerys, convinced that only a united front could save humanity. He remembered the final battle in the north, the hush when dawn broke and the dead were truly gone. And he remembered Daenerys, eyes shining with tears of both grief and hope, letting go of the Iron Throne's destructive allure to forge a new path. All of it led here, to this moment where a child's cry had replaced the sound of steel on steel, where bells of celebration chimed instead of bells of surrender. Jon let out a long breath. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. Together, they would guide their son and the realm toward a horizon unmarked by the shadows of old vendettas. He turned to re-enter the chamber, joining Daenerys as she rested with their newborn. Outside, a gentle breeze carried the scent of spring. And high above, the black silhouette of Drogon glided in a bright sky, no longer a harbinger of war, but a guardian of a peace that Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen had made real, one choice, one day, one life at a time. That was the promise they had forged. That was the world their son would inherit. And in that promise, a new chapter of Westeros began, shaped not by the cold fires of conquest, but by the quiet, unwavering flame of hope. The first soft cry of their newborn son lingered in the corridors of the Red Keep like a gentle echo of hope. For a time, all of King's Landing seemed to hold its breath. The bells pealed, and at every corner, people spoke in awe of the news. The king and queen had welcomed a child into the world, uniting in flesh and blood the lines of Stark and Targaryen. Under the deep blue of an early spring sky, the city bustled with an energy that had nothing to do with commerce or politics. Joy shimmered in the air, a collective exhalation after years of warfare and uncertainty. Even the crows that perched on the ramparts cawed a little more softly, as though mindful of this fragile moment of peace. Inside the queen's chambers, Daenerys Targaryen lay propped against a stack of pillows, her silver hair plastered to her forehead. She was pale from exhaustion but smiled whenever she glanced down at the swaddled infant asleep in her arms. Jon Snow stood nearby with quiet reverence, his dark eyes reflecting relief, protectiveness, and a fierce love that he had never quite known could exist. Between them was the small form of their son, Aerys Stark Targaryen, as they had decided after a long, whispered debate. The name was chosen with utmost care. It honored Daenerys's family line, but with a quiet difference. It also paid homage to the North by weaving in the Stark name, a gesture that promised future unity and reminded everyone that the child was as much wolf as he was dragon. They'd shared doubts about invoking Aerys, but in their hearts, they wished to reclaim and reshape it, letting the name stand for something gentler and fairer than the Mad King who had borne it before. For 3 days, Daenerys rested. The midwives and Maester Ormond insisted she remain mostly in bed, to gain strength after a difficult labor that had taxed her body. Jon took shifts at her bedside, quietly marveling at the child's tiny fingers and the way his cries suddenly stopped whenever Daenerys held him close. The small council buzzed with well-wishers, sending in tokens and gifts. Soft furs from the north, intricately carved wooden dragons from the Dothraki camp, and simple silver bracelets from the Dornish envoys. Even House Glover sent a letter of congratulations. Though the words were terse, the old grudges not entirely forgotten. Tyrion Lannister, ever the watchful hand, managed the city's day-to-day affairs in the king and queen's stead during those first days. He, along with Davos, Brienne, Grey Worm, and Lady Meredith, quietly handled any urgent matters. A dispute among spice merchants from Essos, the finalization of trade routes through the Vale, and the awarding of new farmland to refugees. It felt strange to conduct business without Jon or Daenerys at the table, but all of them agreed that the royal family needed space to bond in those early moments. Outside, the city fairly glowed with celebration. Taverns gave out extra ale, some at discounted rates in the child's honor, and the orphans that Daenerys had long sheltered in the keep's nursery were granted sweet pastries. Bells rang out each morning at sunrise, a lullaby of possibility for those who dared to believe that Westeros might yet shed its violent past. On the fourth day, Daenerys insisted on standing beside Jon at the window, her son in her arms, to greet a select group of onlookers who had gathered in the courtyard below. She wore a simple yet elegant gown, her silver hair braided with modest care, and Jon stood behind her, one arm around her waist to steady her. Down below, hundreds of people craned their necks for a glimpse of the child. The hush in the crowd was profound when Daenerys shifted the blanket, revealing a small face that appeared more curious than frightened by the commotion. It was but a moment, a flash of a baby's round cheeks and the mother's serene smile, but the crowd erupted into applause. Daenerys felt tears prick at her eyes as she realized how fervently these people wanted hope. Jon squeezed her shoulder gently, and in the courtyard, Ser Davos and Brienne exchanged a look of satisfaction, seeing how warmly the city had embraced its new prince. As Daenerys recovered, visitors trickled in one by one. Davos arrived bearing a small wooden dire wolf he had carved himself, shyly explaining that it was his first attempt at carving since he lost his fingers in service to Stannis. Daenerys was touched by his humility and kindness, and Jon clapped the old knight on the back, thanking him for the thoughtful gesture. Tyrion came next, carrying several scrolls from the city's scribes who had composed lavish poems commemorating the birth of the heir. He read a few lines aloud, unable to suppress his smirk at their florid language, comparing the infant's gaze to the twin stars of House Stark and House Targaryen aligned in cosmic harmony. Jon rolled his eyes, but Daenerys laughed, oddly charmed by how the realm sought to mark this moment in words. Grey Worm offered no formal gift but brought a single white flower from the meadow beyond the city walls, a place where the Dothraki sometimes raced their horses. He placed the bloom in a simple vase near Daenerys' bedside and said, "Only for the Queen's son, who brings new life." Daenerys thanked him, recalling the troubled path Grey Worm had walked after losing Missandei. She saw in his eyes something akin to hope as well, a realization that the realm truly had found a path to peace. In the nursery that Daenerys had established for orphan children, the news of the royal baby brought excitement and curiosity. Some of the older children begged the handmaids for a chance to see him, peeking around doorways whenever a guard came through. Daenerys felt a tug at her heart, remembering her own lost childhood, the endless wandering through Essos with only a brother who valued her as a pawn. She resolved that her son would know compassion from the start, would never be isolated in the ways she had once been. Jon felt similarly, recalling his own upbringing as the bastard of Winterfell. Despite Ned Stark's kindness, he remembered a sense of not belonging that haunted him for years. Their child, they vowed, would never question his place in the world. A week after the birth, life in the Red Keep began to resume a more normal routine. Daenerys walked the halls again, still recovering but determined not to remain idle. She insisted on attending a small council meeting, stepping into the chamber with Aerys in her arms and a nursemaid following discreetly behind. The members of the council stood in respect. Tyrion offered to hold the child so Daenerys could speak more freely, which made the others grin, especially Davos, who had never seen Tyrion handle an infant. The dwarf was surprisingly gentle, cradling the baby with a mix of awkwardness and care. It lent the entire meeting a quietly joyous air, a far cry from the fearful councils held in the days of war. They discussed the upcoming festival to mark the official naming of the prince and to celebrate the waning of winter. The city had endured the colder months with far fewer hardships than predicted, thanks to well-managed resources and trade routes. The plan was to hold a public ceremony where the king and queen would present their son, followed by days of feasting, street performances, and contests of skill. A special request had come from the Dothraki camp. Daenerys wished to host a grand horse race as a tribute to the child. Daenerys was inclined to accept, seeing it as another step toward bridging cultures. Jon agreed, though he suggested ensuring the fields were secure so no accidents would spark violence. Grey Worm promised to oversee the arrangements. Preparations for the festival began in earnest. Seamstresses worked late into the night to sew banners combining the dire wolf and the dragon, while city musicians rehearsed lively tunes that blended northern drums with the more melodic strains of southern harps. Bakers experimented with pastries shaped like tiny dragons and wolves dusted with sugar. Rumors spread that Jon and Daenerys might fly overhead on Drogon with their child, though the new mother had no intention of subjecting an infant to the rush of air and the precipitous heights. Instead, she planned to appear on a grand balcony with Jon, letting the city behold their young heir, who would be swaddled safely in her arms. In the meantime, letters poured in from across Westeros. From the north, Lady Sansa wrote with a warmth that surprised even Jon. She spoke of the final snows melting around Winterfell and how she looked forward to meeting her nephew. She also teased that Arya might reappear whenever the fancy struck her. No one ever really knew Arya's whereabouts. Bran, she added, had smiled faintly when he heard the news of the prince but said nothing else. From the Vale, Lord Robin Arryn sent polite congratulations and renewed his pledge to keep the mountain passes open for trade. From Sunspear came a gilded crib carved with sun and spear motifs, a gift from the Martells, who saw in this child the potential for a more unified realm. Even Queen Yara of the Iron Islands sent a terse note, congratulations on continuing the line. May the seas favor your boy. The words were curt, but for the Ironborn, that was practically affectionate. Amid the flurry of festival plans, governance still demanded attention. Tyrion chaired a meeting with northern merchants about shipping goods down the White Knife to White Harbor, then onward by sea to King's Landing. Davos championed an initiative to repair coastal fortresses that had been damaged by previous wars, ensuring the realm stayed safe from possible pirate incursions. Grey Worm took a small contingent of Unsullied to survey roads leading west, listening to farmers' concerns about bandits. The malcontent that once simmered among certain lords seemed to have quieted, though some still grumbled about foreign influences and heavy taxes used for public welfare. Daenerys, resuming her role in these discussions, found a new wellspring of patience. Perhaps it was motherhood tempering her once fiery disposition, or simply the fulfillment of her dream to see the realm healing. She listened more than she spoke, encouraging her advisors to find creative solutions. Jon, for his part, balanced his naturally reserved demeanor with a growing confidence in administrative matters. The two complemented each other as they had on the battlefield, but now their battlefield was negotiation and compromise. When the festival day arrived, dawn broke clear and bright. The city awoke with excitement. Stalls and tents had sprung up along the main thoroughfares, selling everything from honey cakes to spiced wine. Minstrels roamed, singing ballads that celebrated not only the Targaryen legacy but also the Starks' resilience. Farmers from the Crownlands drove in carts laden with fresh produce, early vegetables, herbs, and even a few crates of spring flowers that blossomed sooner in the warmer southern climate. Many of these offerings were laid at the feet of the great September's rebuilding site, where worshippers prayed for the prince's health. At midday, Jon and Daenerys emerged onto a broad balcony facing the city's largest open square. Below them stretched a sea of people. The air rang with cheers and the clang of bells. Daenerys held the infant carefully, his face half hidden by a soft cloth to shield him from the glare of the sun. Jon stepped forward, raising a hand for silence. It took a moment for the crowd to settle, so electric was the atmosphere. People of King's Landing, Jon began, his voice carrying with surprising clarity. We stand before you in gratitude for your perseverance through winter, for your faith in peace, and for the love you have shown our family. Daenerys continued, her tone warm but resonant. We present to you our son, Prince Aerys Stark Targaryen. May he inherit a realm bound not by fear or bloodshed but by unity and shared purpose. She shifted the cloth, letting the crowd glimpse the baby's eyes, round and curious as he surveyed the uproar of voices. A ripple of cheers broke out, and for a moment, the entire square seemed to roar with a happiness seldom felt in a city once torn by war. Flower petals drifted through the air, owned from baskets by children perched on rooftops. The smell of fresh bread and sweet pastries mingled with the scent of incense from newly raised altars. Far overhead, Drogon circled, letting out a resounding call that reverberated over the cheering throng. The rest of the day was given over to celebration. In the wide fields outside the city, the Dothraki staged their spectacular horse race. Daenerys and his finest riders thundered across the plain, hooves drumming the earth in a relentless cadence. Thousands of spectators gathered, placing friendly wagers on which rider would win. Daenerys and Jon arrived in a horse-drawn carriage, the infant safely tucked in a caretaker's arms while they themselves dismounted to a private viewing stand. The sight of the horses charging under the golden sun, manes and tails streaming like banners, brought tears to Daenerys' eyes. It reminded her of how she once rode with a Khalasar across endless grass seas, never imagining she would stand in Westeros, free of the old cycle of violence, celebrating the birth of her child. The lead rider, a rangy Dothraki man with arms covered in swirling tattoos, crossed the finish line to deafening cheers. Khalnaras raised his arms in salute and the watchers roared their approval. There was no pillaging, no cruelty, only a shared thrill for speed and skill. Jon exchanged a brief, impressed nod with Grey Worm, acknowledging the victory of peace over suspicion. That night, bonfires lit the fields and men and women danced together. Some Dothraki taught Westerosi farmers a few basic steps of their energetic dances, leading to much laughter and occasional confusion. A group of traveling mummers performed shadow puppet plays for the children, depicting a simplified version of how Daenerys and Jon had united to save the realm. Back within the city walls, a series of contests took place: archery, swordplay with blunted weapons, and wrestling. Men and women from every walk of life tested their mettle, cheered on by families who feasted on roasted meats and honey-drizzled fruits. The winners were awarded small medallions bearing a wolf and a dragon entwined, a token of the new age. Brienne of Tarth oversaw the swordplay event, her keen gaze ensuring fairness. She even offered pointers to the novices, who stood in awe of her. Tyrion wandered among the crowds, sampling Alesh and ciders, exchanging wry banter with merchants who teased him about his newfound fatherly poise whenever he held the infant prince. For several days, King's Landing reveled in unaccustomed jubilation. Crime dipped to near nothing, as even pickpockets found themselves drawn into the general merriment. Merchants thrived, selling out their wares. The orphans of the Red Keep's nursery were brought out to enjoy puppet shows and sweet treats, courtesy of Daenerys' continued charity. Ser Davos could be seen quietly showing a group of these children how to carve little animals from scraps of wood, passing on a humble skill. Grey Worm patrolled among the throng with a small squad of Unsullied, ever watchful, but found little need to intervene. And yet, amid the brightness, Jon remained vigilant. He had lived long enough to know that times of celebration could mask the seeds of future trouble. An odd sense of foreboding tugged at him whenever he spotted certain lords lingering on the sidelines, their smiles never reaching their eyes. Westeros might have found peace, but it was still a tapestry of alliances and grudges. He spoke of this unease to Daenerys late one night as they finally lay down to rest, their baby asleep in a cradle near the bed. She listened, stroking the back of Jon's hand as it rested on her shoulder. "We should never forget how quickly fortunes can turn," she whispered. "But I won't let fear overshadow what we've achieved. Let them plot, if plot they must. We have a realm behind us and we have each other." Jon kissed her temple, comforted by her steadfastness. "We'll keep our eyes open, that's all. And we'll protect our son." Daenerys' gaze dropped to the cradle where the child slept, his dark lashes brushing chubby cheeks. "Always," she murmured. Once the festival concluded and King's Landing returned to a calmer pace, letters arrived from across the realm praising the successful event. Lord Royce of the Vale wrote of the positive impression it left on his travelers. Lady Sansa, though she had not attended, confessed that she'd received plenty of ravens describing the festivities, and she looked forward to planning her own celebrations in the north come summer when she hoped the king and queen might visit with the prince. Weeks turned into a gentle transition toward late spring. The air warmed, flowers bloomed in the gardens, and the city took on a more pleasant hue. Daenerys' recovery allowed her to go on short walks through the palace grounds, pushing a small carriage with her son nestled among soft blankets. Sometimes, the boy reached up, cooing at the sunlight flickering through leaves. Jon often walked beside them, discussing trade negotiations or field reports. Now and then, the baby gave a hearty yell, as though protesting the dryness of political talk, and Daenerys would laugh, adjusting the child's bonnet or offering him a finger to grasp. As the weeks passed, she resumed her full schedule of audiences in the throne room, although, in truth, there was no single throne but a circular arrangement of chairs. She and Jon would sit in slightly elevated seats at the apex with the advisors around them. Petitioners came, a group of blacksmiths seeking new forges, a minor lord complaining about boundary disputes, an envoy from Bravos who hoped to renew favorable loans. Daenerys' child was not always in attendance, but the entire court felt a subtle warmth in her presence now that she was a mother. Even the older lords who once grumbled about foreign influences softened somewhat, seeing the queen's careful devotion to the realm's daily problems. Jon, more comfortable in official settings than he'd ever been, pitched in with calm authority, referencing old Stark values of honesty and duty. One afternoon, 2 envoys appeared from the north, bearing tidings directly from Lady Sansa. They brought reports of slight unrest near the borders with the mountain clans. Nothing drastic, merely the usual friction, but Sansa asked if the crown might send an observer to ensure neutrality in the matter. Jon volunteered immediately, eager to visit his home and see his sister again, but a flicker of concern crossed Daenerys' face. She worried about him traveling so far from their newborn child, and she also knew that without Jon's presence in King's Landing, certain factions might test her resilience. In the end, they decided to dispatch Davos and Brienne instead. Davos had proven invaluable in navigating northern politics without ruffling feathers, while Brienne's presence guaranteed the best of intentions. She was well respected by Sansa and widely known for her integrity. Letters flew back and forth, finalizing the arrangement. Within a week, Davos and Brienne set out with a small retinue heading north along improved roads that cut travel time significantly. Jon entrusted them with personal messages for Sansa and for Tormund Giantsbane if he happened to be visiting from beyond the wall. No realm is free of all trouble, and around this time, whispers emerged of banditry resurfacing in the Riverlands. Minor enough, it seemed, but local lords requested the crown's support. Tyrion recommended sending a small squad of the City Watch, along with some of the reformed soldiers from the north, to quell any lawlessness. Jon agreed, and Grey Worm arranged the operation, ensuring they had adequate provisions. Even in times of peace, roving brigands could exploit travelers, so the crown responded swiftly to avoid letting such problems fester. Daenerys, wanting to keep an ear to the ground, read every report carefully. She had no desire for a return to large-scale bloodshed, yet she recognized that the realm could not simply expect old habits, lawlessness, raids, petty feuds to vanish overnight. She reminded Jon that vigilance would remain their greatest tool. He nodded, recalling the vow they both made to guide Westeros not by force, but with steady, measured resolve. In the midst of these concerns, a curious letter arrived from across the sea, Volantis, to be precise. A group of merchant princes expressed a wish to open new trade ties with King's Landing now that stability had seemingly taken root. They hinted at sending a delegation of wealthy traders to negotiate tariffs on luxury goods. Once, Daenerys might have harbored deep suspicions of Essosi merchant princes, recalling the corruption of Slavers Bay and her battles to abolish slavery. But times had changed, and she saw this as an opportunity to demonstrate Westeros' stance on fairness. She resolved to grant these merchants an audience, so long as they understood that slavery had no place in her kingdom. Jon supported her wholeheartedly, seeing a chance to enrich the realm's coffers while promoting a more ethical stance on commerce. When the Volantene ships arrived, they brought a small retinue of finely dressed envoys. Their leader introduced himself as Morsinio Naker, a polished man whose manners were almost too refined. He bowed low to Daenerys and Jon in the council chamber, every inch of him exuding courtesy and sly confidence. Tyrion, serving his hand, sparred verbally with Morsinio over the nuances of import duties and shipping fees, while the king and queen observed. Morsinio proposed a route that would bring exotic silks, rare spices, and precious gems directly to King's Landing. In return, he asked for reduced taxes and priority docking at the city's port. Daenerys leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. She reminded him that in her dominion, no goods produced by slave labor would be permitted. A flicker of something crossed Morsinio's expression, surprise, annoyance perhaps, but he masked it quickly, assuring her that Volantis was a complex city, that the old slave markets there were evolving, and that his house did not deal in forced labor. Jon quietly studied him, recalling how easily men in positions of power might lie to secure profit. He watched for any sign of deception. Tyrion pressed the matter, requesting proof that no enslaved workforce participated in the production of the goods. Morsinio hemmed and hawed, then finally acquiesced to the demand that an official from King's Landing inspect his operations in Volantis before finalizing any major agreement. Daenerys glanced at Jon, and they shared a silent nod. The envoy, left with little choice, accepted the condition. The result was a tentative accord. Trade would open on a trial basis, but a crown agent, perhaps one with knowledge of Essos, such as Grey Worm or one of his trusted soldiers, would inspect the supply chains for any sign of slavery. Word of the potential deal spread quickly through the capital. Some merchants grew excited at the prospect of new, luxurious goods that could fetch high prices in Westeros. Others worried about the moral implications, questioning whether Essos truly could break free from its slave-based economy. Daenerys stood firm, repeating again and again that Westeros would not profit from misery. The city's people, many of whom had experienced the horrors of war or had been freed from some form of bondage, by and large supported her stance. A few cynical lords saw it as meddling in foreign affairs, but they held their tongues, knowing how popular the Queen's vow against slavery was among common folk. Amid these negotiations, the royal child grew quickly, his infant cries turning into giggles and half-coherent babbles. Ares displayed an unusual mixture of calm curiosity and sudden bursts of determined wailing that startled even Daenerys. At times, the Queen found herself marveling at how such a small being could command the attention of everyone around him. Jon often slipped away from council duties just to hold his son for a few minutes, pressing gentle kisses to the boy's downy hair. On more than one occasion, the child tugged on Jon's dark curls, drawing a rare laugh from the king. 2 months after Ares's birth, the sun rose warm and golden over King's Landing. A letter arrived at dawn from the north, carried by a swift messenger bird. Davos and Brienne had resolved the mountain clan disputes, convincing both sides to abide by Sansa's rulings. Sansa wrote that she looked forward to hosting the entire royal family for a visit at the end of summer, once the roads were thoroughly clear. She wanted to see her nephew. She also hinted that some of the northern lords remained cautious about the Targaryen influence, but that most had softened upon hearing stories of how Daenerys was handling governance. The letter ended with a personal note to Jon. "You have found the peace you always dreamed of for the realm. Hold it tight. The North remembers both the past's pains and the new promise of tomorrow." Jon read those lines and felt a wave of affection for his sister. He told Daenerys they should begin planning the journey soon. She agreed, though the idea of traveling with an infant across half the continent was daunting. They would need a proper escort, enough provisions, and a comfortable way for the child to make the trip without falling ill. But the notion of uniting the realms further by an official visit to Winterfell stirred Daenerys' heart. She had never truly gotten to know the North in peacetime. Now she might walk those ancient halls as queen, wife, and mother all at once. Spring deepened into early summer, and the city's transformation became more evident. Gardens flourished, the harbor bustled with ships from the Reach, Dorne, and now even the Iron Islands in limited capacity. A minor trade route with the Dothraki Sea started to trickle in exotic items, nothing major, but enough to pique the curiosity of local craftsmen. Sunlight glinted off the polished marble of newly rebuilt sections of the Great September, though the faith kept the design simpler than in past times of extravagance. The orphans in Daenerys' care continued to thrive, many adopted into families that wanted to start anew in a peaceful era. In a private corner of the Red Keep's courtyard, Daenerys strolled with her child, who now babbled nonsense words as she pointed out the flowers and the small birds nesting in the eaves. Ares cooed at the flutter of wings, and Daenerys felt her heart swell. She recalled how lonely her childhood had been, carted around Essos by Viserys, never certain of tomorrow. Her son would know security, would know the love of two parents, and would see a realm that was forging a new identity beyond the bloodshed of old. She felt a pang of gratitude toward all those who had sacrificed so that this reality could exist. Yora, Missandei, her dragons, the armies of the living who had fought the dead. Their memories endured in the hush of every peaceful moment. One evening, Jon found her gazing out across the city from a high balcony, the baby dozing on her shoulder. He placed a hand at the small of her back. "It's beautiful at night," he said, looking at the flickering torches and lanterns below. "Nothing like the King's Landing I first saw." She leaned into him. "It's our city now, shaped by all who live here, not just by the ones with crowns." He nodded, falling silent for a moment. Then, quietly, he said, "We should announce the plan to visit Winterfell soon. The roads will only get better, and Tyrion can manage the capital in our absence. It would be good for the realm to see us traveling with our son, to show that we haven't forgotten the North, my home." Daenerys considered, her eyes on the softly lit skyline. "Yes, let's do it. We'll travel slowly, making stops along the way, meeting people, hearing their concerns. It can be a kind of royal progress, a tradition that fosters trust." Jon smiled at the idea. He thought of how King Robert Baratheon had once descended upon Winterfell in pomp and noise, how that visit had changed his life forever. Now, he and Daenerys would retrace a similar path but with an entirely different purpose. Instead of a call to arms or a dangerous intrigue, they would bring their child, symbolizing hope rather than conflict. "We'll need to prepare well," he murmured. "The journey will be long, and our enemies, if any remain, might see it as an opportunity." Daenerys acknowledged this with a soft nod, pressing a kiss to their sleeping child's forehead. "We'll be ready," she said. "We have loyal guards, good advisors, and if anyone dares threaten us, they'll find that the Mother of Dragons hasn't lost her fire." A few days later, the announcement was made. The king and queen would embark on a progress north to Winterfell, accompanied by a well-planned entourage. The city responded with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Some wondered if the capital would remain stable without Jon and Daenerys present. Tyrion assured them that the small council, along with Grey Worm's Unsullied, would maintain order. Lady Meredith of Tarth and other key figures would remain behind, ensuring continuity. Most of the common folk saw the journey as a sign that the realm was truly whole again, bridging north and south. Preparations began in earnest. Carriages were lined with thick cushions for the infant prince. Supply wagons were loaded with enough provisions to feed the traveling party, and skilled soldiers were handpicked to serve as guards. Daenerys personally inspected the carriage intended for her son, wanting to be certain it was comfortable and safe. Jon oversaw the route planning with Ser Davos, who had returned from the north in time to offer insights on the best roads. Brienne decided to remain in the capital as she was needed to keep training the city watch and to handle sensitive legal matters. However, she gave the king and queen detailed notes on northern lords and their latest alliances gleaned from her travels with Davos. The day of departure dawned bright and mild. The city turned out to watch the royal entourage file through the gates, knights in gleaming armor, supply carts rattling, outriders on fine horses scanning the crowds. At the center, 2 carriages bearing royal sigils, one for Daenerys and the infant prince, another for additional handmaids and nursemaids. Jon rode alongside on horseback, wanting the freedom to move swiftly up and down the line if needed. Tyrion and Grey Worm stood at the gates to bid them farewell, each offering a final bow. Daenerys leaned out of her carriage window, promising Tyrion that she would return before the year was out. She placed full trust in him to keep the city's gears turning. And so began the royal progress. The roads leading out of King's Landing were lined with curious onlookers. Children waved scraps of cloth bearing hand-drawn wolves and dragons, farmers doffed their hats, and traveling merchants paused their wagons to let the entourage pass. Daenerys sometimes parted the curtains of the carriage so the people could glimpse her holding the baby, and she smiled at their cheers. Though the infant was often asleep or fussing, the warmth of the reception never faded. Jon, riding close, would occasionally turn his head to see Daenerys' expression, finding it calm, resolved, and touched by wonder. For days, they moved steadily northward. At each town or holdfast, they stopped to rest, to greet local leaders, and to share bread and salt in the old tradition. Jon offered counsel where disputes arose, while Daenerys visited small septs and sometimes gave money for repairs to battered roads. The baby drew coos and exclamations everywhere they went. Some older northern folk, still wary of Targaryen rule, softened the moment they saw the queen so gently tending her child. A couple of times, small lords hosted banquets in their honor. One in the Riverlands, Lord Vance, provided a feast of fish, bread, and berry tarts in a refurbished hall once charred by war. The man apologized repeatedly for the hall's shabby state, but Daenerys merely praised his efforts to rebuild. Local musicians performed tunes mixing southern flutes with northern drums, an echo of the festival spirit that had marked the prince's birth. Jon politely endured being toasted again and again, though he preferred to slip away early to check on the infant. Travel was not without its challenges. A violent storm rolled in one afternoon, drenching the party and turning the roads to thick mud. Progress slowed, and they had to camp in a clearing, raising makeshift pavilions. Daenerys worried about the child catching cold, but the nursemaids kept him bundled and dry, while the guards built large fires. Jon stood in the downpour, organizing the wagon's placement to keep them from sinking, reminding everyone to remain calm. By nightfall, the rain eased. The infant remained fussy, but eventually slept in Daenerys' arms. When dawn broke, the roads had become quagmires, but with Davos' guidance, They found a viable route along higher ground and pressed on. As they approached the neck, the swampy region dividing the north from the rest of Westeros, the air grew cooler. Jon felt a stir of nostalgia for the land of his youth. He pointed out features to Daenerys: watchtowers where the crannogmen might dwell, the winding causeways that made invasion difficult. Here, the welcome was more subdued, as the population was sparse. Still, House Reed sent a small delegation, bearing a gift of medicinal herbs said to be excellent for colicky infants. Daenerys accepted with gratitude, half amused by how many people offered child-rearing advice. Day by day, they neared the north proper. The fields gave way to wilder terrain, the air crisp with the scent of pine and looming rains. At a small fortress known as Moat Cailin, they paused to rest, taking in the ancient ruins' aura. Daenerys stood on a crumbling battlement, Aerys snug in a sling across her front, and gazed northward at the winding road to Winterfell. A hush fell as she realized that soon she would see the Stark stronghold in its peacetime splendor, no longer overshadowed by the threat of the White Walkers. Jon came up behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're quiet," he said. She gave a soft smile, shifting the sling so the baby's face was visible. He slept soundly, little fists curled. "I'm thinking about how this place once felt like a last bastion of defense against the horrors from beyond the wall. And now we travel not as warriors in a final stand, but as a family coming home." Jon looked north, the memories of White Walkers and undead hordes never far from his mind. "We've all changed," he murmured. "Winterfell will always be home, but I'm not the same man who first left it. And you're not the same woman who crossed the sea to claim a throne." Daenerys turned, brushing a faint kiss over his cheek. "No, we've grown. And so will our child. Each step we take reminds me of how far we've come." They pressed on. The weather turned sharply colder, though it was nothing like the dead of winter they'd once endured. The infant fussed more often, unaccustomed to the chill, but the nursemaids kept him swaddled in thick furs. Jon's men would search each campsite carefully, ensuring no hidden threats lurked. Occasionally, local hunters approached, curious and respectful, offering tokens of welcome, a basket of berries, a pelt for the baby, small gifts that spoke of northern hospitality. Finally, the walls of Winterfell appeared on the horizon, standing proud against a backdrop of evergreen forests. Smoke curled from its chimneys, a sign of the warmth that awaited within. Jon felt his heart thud, recalling the first time he had seen the sight after joining the Night's Watch, and later when he returned to face the war against the dead. Now he came as king, with a queen at his side, carrying their son. A swirl of emotions churned within him: anticipation, gratitude, and the faint ache for those who would never see this day: Ned Stark, Robb, the many who'd fallen. A horn sounded from Winterfell's watchtower, echoing across the open fields. The gates swung wide, and a column of riders emerged to greet them. Leading them was Sansa Stark, cloaked in rich northern wool, her red hair catching the sun. Beside her rode a handful of northern lords, banners fluttering: Manderly's merman, Serwyn's battle-axe, Glover's gauntlet, and others who had once bent the knee to Jon as king in the north. Now they came to welcome the king and queen of the Seven Kingdoms, bound in unity. Jon urged his horse forward. He dismounted as soon as he was close enough, and Sansa did the same, stepping onto the damp ground. For a breath, they stood in silence, remembering their last parting. Then Sansa's eyes shone with unshed tears, and she moved toward him. He enveloped her in a fierce embrace, murmuring her name as she whispered, "Welcome home, Jon." Daenerys joined them, the baby in her arms. Sansa pulled back from Jon, her gaze shifting to the infant. She dipped her head courteously to Daenerys, then hesitated, eyes brimming with quiet wonder. "May I?" she asked, gesturing gently. Daenerys nodded, carefully transferring the child into Sansa's arms. The Lady of Winterfell cradled her nephew with a tenderness that made her lips quiver in a smile. "Hello, little one," she breathed. "I'm your Aunt Sansa." The baby stirred, blinking at the new face, then relaxed against the warmth of her furs. A wave of hushed greetings rippled among the northern lords, many of whom had never seen Daenerys up close. Some still carried the old wariness, but the sight of her so gently watching Sansa cradle the child diffused much of it. The entourage continued its approach to Winterfell's courtyard, where more people waited: servants, guards, townsfolk. They bowed or curtsied as the king and queen passed. The stables bustled, men calling out to handle the horses. The castle felt alive in a way Jon hadn't experienced since before the wars. Sansa led them inside, guiding them through familiar corridors. Jon inhaled the scents of Winterfell. Pine logs in the hearth, bread baking in the kitchens, the faint must of ancient stone. The baby gave a small cry at the sudden change in temperature, and Daenerys rocked him gently, following as Sansa led them to the great hall. The long tables were set with a welcoming feast, simple by southern standards, but hearty and warm. Roasted game, root vegetables, and steaming bread. Banners of House Stark adorned the walls, along with newer flags bearing the Targaryen dragon, a symbolic merging that once might have seemed impossible. Bran Stark waited by the high table, seated in his wheeled chair. He watched them approach with a subtle smile. "Welcome back," he said to Jon, his voice as distant and cryptic as ever. Then his eyes fell on Daenerys and the baby. "I saw you coming," he said softly, though that was no surprise. Daenerys offered him a polite greeting, mindful of the power Bran wielded as the three-eyed raven. He nodded in acknowledgement. The child has a bright presence. Jon wasn't entirely sure how to respond, but Bran's small, knowing grin reassured him it was meant as a compliment. Lady Arya was not present, and Sansa explained she was still wandering distant lands or seas, though she had sent word she might return soon. Daenerys assured Sansa that they would happily remain at Winterfell for some weeks, giving Arya time to appear if she wished. That evening, a feast was held. It lacked the grandeur of the King's Landing festivities, but what it had was heartfelt sincerity. Northern bannermen toasted the king in the north they once knew, raising their cups to him and to Daenerys. Some stumbled over how to address her, uncertain if they should call her Your Grace or My Queen, but she smiled gently, letting them find their comfort. The baby remained mostly in Daenerys's arms or with a nursemaid nearby, and every so often, Sansa or another lady would carefully hold him, cooing or pressing a soft kiss to his tiny brow. Jon watched from the high table, overcome by the sense that he was witnessing a dream once impossible. Here they were, seated in the great hall of Winterfell, feasting not in fear of war but in celebration of a child's future. Mead flowed, songs filled the air, and the warmth of braziers kept the chill at bay. Among the guests, Gendry Baratheon, who had accompanied them north, chatted amiably with a few older lords, bridging another gap between once warring houses. Davos exchanged stories of smuggling days with men who had fought for House Stark. The Targaryen banners alongside the Stark ones no longer felt jarring. They felt like a new tapestry being woven in real time. Late that night, when the fires had burned low and most guests had retired, Jon stood outside in the courtyard, snow crunching underfoot, breath turning to mist. He gazed up at the clear northern sky, the stars bright and infinite. Daenerys emerged from within, wrapped in a heavy cloak. The baby slept in the arms of a handmaid back in their chambers, giving the parents a moment of solitude. She moved to Jon's side, slipping her hand into his. "It's colder than King's Landing," she whispered, half laughing when her breath puffed white in the air. "But it's beautiful." He nodded, scanning the walls of Winterfell. "I always felt like an outsider here, growing up," he admitted softly. "I was never quite sure where I belonged. But now, coming back with you, with our son, it feels right." Daenerys turned her face up to his, eyes shining in the starlight. "Our home, then? One of many, but ours nonetheless." He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. "Home," he echoed. Above them, a raven flew by, silhouetted against the moon. In the distance, a lone wolf's howl echoed across the dark. It did not sound mournful, but rather like a call of acknowledgement, a sentinel's greeting. Jon closed his eyes, remembering Ghost, the white dire wolf now roaming free in the far north after the wars. There was a sense of continuity in that sound, a reminder that the old ways still lingered even as a new era unfolded. Over the ensuing days, Winterfell buzzed with activity. The king and queen took part in councils with the northern lords, hearing their concerns and reaffirming mutual goals: security, trade, the safeguarding of winter stores even in this relatively peaceful time. Daenerys walked the walls of the castle with Sansa, exchanging stories of leadership. The old friction between them had melted away, replaced by a deeper understanding. They spoke of how to encourage closer ties between the North and the Crownlands, how to handle lords who might still resist. Sansa teased Daenerys gently about motherhood, remarking on how fiercely protective the queen was of her son. Daenerys only smiled, acknowledging that no matter how many armies she had commanded or dragons she had flown, the vulnerability of caring for a child surpassed them all. At one point, Jon and Daenerys ventured to the godwood, strolling beneath the red leaves of the weirwood tree. The baby was with them, tucked in a sling against Daenerys' chest. They found Bran there, motionless in his chair, eyes half closed as if in a dream. The weirwood's face, carved centuries ago, wept sap like crimson tears. Bran opened his eyes when they approached, a faint, mysterious smile on his lips. "You've come far," he said softly. "From where you started. Both of you." Jon inclined his head, not quite sure if Bran was speaking to them in a present sense or in one of his visions of past and future. Daenerys met Bran's gaze, searching for any hidden omens about their child or the realm. But Bran offered nothing more than that cryptic greeting. Instead, he simply rolled his chair closer to watch the infant with calm curiosity. The hush of the godwood settled around them, and for a time they simply breathed in the quiet, letting the ancient tree bear witness to how the world had changed. Word reached them that the roads back to King's Landing remained clear, and that Tyrion and Grey Worm had kept the peace. The trade deal with Volantis was proceeding with caution, no sign of forced labor so far, though the appointed crown agent had only just arrived in Essos to inspect. The Dothraki near the capital continued to coexist with the locals, their presence still a marvel for many Westerosi. Davos's latest raven mentioned that small pockets of trouble in the Riverlands had been stamped out with minimal bloodshed, the outlaws either captured or driven off. Another moon's turn passed, and it became clear that the king and queen would soon need to return south to oversee matters. Yet they lingered, wanting to give the infant time to adjust to the northern air. Sansa insisted they stay as long as they wished, remarking that the realm was still stable enough to allow the royal family a true respite. Jon took the opportunity to reacquaint himself with the people of Winterfell, greeting old faces in the courtyard, paying respects at the crypts where his adoptive father Ned Stark lay. Daenerys joined him there once, marveling at the stone likenesses of ancient Stark kings and lords. She placed a hand on Jon's arm when they reached Ned's statue, sensing the depth of Jon's emotion. "He was a good man," Jon murmured, voice catching in his throat. "He taught me honor, even if I wasn't truly his blood." Daenerys bent to set a single white flower at the foot of the statue, the same kind Grey Worm once offered her. "You are his in every way that mattered," she said gently. "And your son will carry that legacy side by side with the Targaryen name." Jon exhaled, the ache in his chest easing at her words. They turned and walked back, the torches flickering in the crypt's somber stillness. Outside, the northern wind tugged at their cloaks, and the baby gurgled, seemingly happy to leave the dark confines. Eventually, letters from Tyrion grew more pressing, highlighting negotiations that required the king or queen's seal and rumors of new political stirrings among certain lords in the Westerlands. Reluctantly, Jon and Daenerys prepared to depart. On the morning of their leave-taking, Winterfell's courtyard filled with lords and ladies, servants and stable hands, all bidding farewell to the royal party. Sansa embraced Jon tightly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She kissed Daenerys' cheek, then fussed over the infant one last time, promising to visit King's Landing herself when time allowed. Bran offered a cryptic, the lines of fate are woven stronger now, which no one quite understood but accepted with mild smiles. The procession set out under a gray sky, the wind carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Jon rode near Daenerys' carriage once more, vigilant yet at ease. He had seen with his own eyes that the North remained loyal. And Daenerys felt a surge of affection for these proud, resilient people who had welcomed her into their stronghold. Their child slept peacefully in the carriage, lulled by the steady rumble of wheels on dirt. As the journey back south began, the pace was a bit quicker, each day bringing them closer to the capital. Yet the mood was different from the outward trip. There was a calm satisfaction in the air, as though they had sealed a bond that once seemed improbable. Villages they passed greeted them with curiosity mixed with recognition. Word had spread that the king and queen had visited Winterfell peacefully, forging ties that strengthened the realm as a whole. On the final stretch, a raven reached them from Tyrion containing urgent news. The Westerlands, seat of House Lannister, had a new wave of internal disputes now that Lord Tyrion was effectively allied with the crown. Distant cousins of the Lannisters questioned whether they should remain loyal to a branch of the family associated with the usurping Targaryen line. Though Cersei and Jaime were gone, their memories still influenced certain corners of the Westerlands. Tyrion suggested the king and queen address this promptly to avoid festering rebellion. Jon read the message aloud to Daenerys as their carriage rattled along. She frowned, recalling how the Lannisters had once been her bitterest enemies, yet Tyrion had proven the exception. "We'll meet with them," she said firmly. "I won't allow old grudges to poison the realm again." Jon nodded. "We'll handle it. Tyrion will know how best to approach them, but we'll stand behind him." They pressed on, and late on a golden afternoon, the walls of King's Landing came into view. A city guard contingent rode out to welcome them, horns announcing the royal family's return. Inside the gates, people gathered to wave, though not in the raucous festival manner. This was more a gesture of relief that their rulers had returned safely. Daenerys peered from the carriage, noticing how much greener the city looked. Young vines clung to old walls, patches of newly planted shrubs dotted public squares. The reconstruction was ongoing, but the scars of war were fading under fresh growth. In the Red Keep, Tyrion greeted them in the courtyard, bowing in an almost theatrical way. Grey Worm stood beside him, unsmiling but respectful. Daenerys stepped out, the baby in her arms, and Tyrion's expression softened as he welcomed the child back to the capital. "I trust the North was hospitable?" he asked. Jon nodded, exchanging a glance with Daenerys that spoke volumes about how well their visit had gone. They reconvened the small council the next morning. Tyrion presented an overview of developments during their absence. The trade deal with Volantis was still under scrutiny by the Crown's agent, but no major violations had been found. The Dothraki remained cooperative, with Khal Nares even asking about the possibility of leading a small band further west to see more of Westeros. The City Watch had handled a handful of minor crimes, but nothing that threatened the peace. The problem lay primarily in the Westerlands, where certain Lannister relatives, distant cousins like the Farmans, the Marbrands, and a few others, were muttering about their family's diminished status. Tyrion had invited them to King's Landing for direct talks, hoping to head off any rebellious stirrings. Daenerys listened, occasionally soothing the infant, who had begun to fuss. Jon rubbed the baby's back as Tyrion detailed how these lords felt overshadowed, believing that House Lannister's name carried little weight under the Targaryen Stark monarchy. Davos proposed gestures of goodwill, ensuring that trade routes through Lannisport were expanded, acknowledging certain local traditions. Tyrion thought that might work, but stressed they must not appear weak or overly appeasing. Daenerys recalled how House Lannister had once been the iron fist of the realm, with gold and cunning enough to subjugate or manipulate entire regions. Now, only Tyrion truly held influence, and he had cast his lot with the crown, forging a new path. "Set the meeting," she told Tyrion. "We'll speak to them as equals, not as conquerors. If they harbor ill will, we'll address it calmly but firmly. The realm can't afford another war sparked by wounded pride." Jon concurred, adding that any who refused a peaceful approach would be dealt with as traitors. The vow was spoken quietly, but the entire council felt the weight behind his words. They had known Jon to be merciful, but also unwavering once his mind was set. Grey Worm nodded, ever ready to enforce the king's decree. In the days that followed, the invited Lannister cousins trickled into King's Landing. Each was received politely but with a watchful undercurrent. Some arrived with a small retinue of knights, clad in Lannister crimson. Daenerys observed them from atop the Red Keep's balcony as they rode in, scanning their faces for hidden malice. Tyrion arranged private meetings before any grand council. He used his knowledge of their families, their assets, their resentments, their personal ambitions to gauge which among them might be swayed. Jon and Daenerys took turns attending these discussions, always mindful that their presence needed to project confidence. The infant prince, now nearing half a year old, sometimes accompanied them, perched on Daenerys' lap or cared for by a nursemaid nearby. His presence was a silent testament to the future. Often, the Lannister cousins found themselves disarmed by the sight of Daenerys bouncing a baby while calmly discussing trade percentages. One cousin, Lord Martin Lannister, a sandy-haired man in his late 20s, expressed frustration that Tyrion's alliance with the Targaryen queen had effectively ended the Lannisters' direct hold on the throne. "We're a proud house," he said, though not aggressively. "Once the ruling power, now overshadowed. How can we ensure the Westerlands isn't neglected?" Daenerys replied gently, "You have my word that the crown sees every region as vital. We've poured resources into the north, the Riverlands, the Crownlands themselves. The Westerlands will receive the same attention. But we ask in return that you stand with us, not plot behind closed doors." Jon added, "Our success, our child's future, depends on unity, not old rivalries. House Lannister is still influential if you choose to wield that influence in cooperation rather than defiance." Tyrion watched the exchange carefully, stepping in with talk of improving roads to Lannisport, new trade concessions that might route more goods through their ports. Over several days, a pattern emerged. Some cousins were mollified by the promise of fair trade and recognition, while a few remained aloof, clearly nursing grudges. Yet none were openly rebellious, lacking the power or the will to challenge the crown outright. Daenerys and Jon sensed that for now, at least, the Westerlands would remain in the fold, guided by a mixture of pragmatic self-interest and a grudging respect for the new monarchy. As these tensions eased, life in King's Landing resumed its gentle rhythm. Daenerys found herself juggling motherhood with rulership in an unexpectedly rewarding way. She would spend mornings signing edicts or hearing petitions, afternoons tending to her son or walking the gardens with him, and evenings discussing strategy with Jon and Tyrion. The child's presence lent an air of domestic warmth to the once austere palace. Even hardened soldiers occasionally smiled when they heard the baby's laughter echo through the corridors. Season by season, the capital's scars healed further. Some neighborhoods that had once been slums were renovated, turning into modest but livable quarters. The volunteer library project that Samwell Tarly had envisioned began to take shape, with scribes collecting texts from across Westeros and Essos. Daenerys had insisted that knowledge be made accessible to all who could read, and that free lessons in reading and writing be offered to the city's youth. The faith of the Seven cooperated, seeing literacy as a virtue. Tyrion oversaw the budget, ensuring that the funds allocated were not squandered. The Dothraki, ever curious, even contributed a few scrolls describing their customs, though their written language was sparse. By the time summer reached its height, the realm was breathing easier than it had in many generations. Pirate activity in the Narrow Sea had plummeted thanks to Yara's cooperation with the Crown. The Iron Bank of Bravos, noting the realm's newfound stability, offered loans at fairer rates, seeing a reduction in risk. Trade with Essos expanded cautiously but fruitfully, with the Crown's agent assuring Daenerys that no slave labor was present in the shipments. The labor system in Volantis was not perfect, but it inched toward reform, spurred partly by the desire for profitable trade with Westeros. Drogon, meanwhile, still roost near the old dragon pit, occasionally soaring over the city or venturing farther south in search of game. Citizens had grown accustomed to the massive silhouette blotting out the sun, and though they still felt awe, it was not the raw terror of years past. Daenerys sometimes visited Drogon, letting her son see the great beast from a safe distance. The child would babble in excitement, little fists waving. Drogon would rumble low in his chest, as if acknowledging the babe. More than once, Daenerys felt a pang at the memory of her other dragons lost in war, wishing they too could witness this era of calm. Life in the Red Keep took on a familial cadence. At night, Daenerys and Jon often dined quietly with Tyrion or Davos, discussing the day's events. The infant prince, growing sturdier, would be passed around until his bedtime. Lady Meredith of Tarth sometimes joined them, detailing new laws that aimed to protect common folk from predatory lenders or unscrupulous lordlings. Brienne, whenever she traveled south, spent her days training the next generation of knights and city watch captains, ensuring that moral integrity tempered martial skill. Gendry Baratheon divided his time between Storm's End and King's Landing, forging new alliances and continuing the shipbuilding project that would guard the coasts. In letters, Sansa wrote that the north remained steady, that the harvest looked promising, and that she intended to visit King's Landing soon to help oversee an all-realm gathering of lords who would discuss long-term strategies for prosperity. She teased Jon about preparing enough guest rooms for her retinue, which included not only northern bannermen but also traveling craftspeople eager to learn from southern counterparts. Daenerys welcomed the idea, picturing a series of councils that might cement the lasting peace they all dreamed of. As the child neared his first name day, the realm prepared for another celebration, smaller than the festival that greeted his birth, but still significant. The king and queen planned a modest feast in the Red Keep's courtyard, inviting representatives from each major region to stand as witnesses to the boy's first milestone. Daenerys insisted on making it a reflection of the unity that had blossomed, a banquet featuring dishes from Dorne, the North, the Vale, the Stormlands, the Reach, the Iron Islands, the Crownlands, and even influences from Essos. Tyrion arranged the logistics with relish, ensuring every corner of the realm felt represented. When the day came, the courtyard thrummed with color and sound. Banners of each great house fluttered from tall poles. Musicians formed small ensembles, each reflecting the traditions of their homeland. Drummers from the north, flutists from the Reach, a trio from Essos playing stringed instruments unknown to most Westerosi. Tables groaned under the weight of food: roast boar, spicy Dornish peppers, sweet pies from the arbor, stews thick with vegetables from the riverlands. The orphans Daenerys had once sheltered in the keep's nursery, now older and placed in various apprenticeships, were honored guests, marking how far they'd come. Jon and Daenerys arrived with the toddler prince between them. He was now taking tentative steps, but mostly clung to their hands for balance. His hair was dark and curly like Jon's, though streaked with lighter tones in certain lights. His eyes, once an indeterminate color, had settled into a soft gray, reminiscent of the Stark line. He looked around at the bustling courtyard with wide wonder, occasionally letting out a squeal of delight when he spotted something that caught his fancy, a bright banner, a dancing juggler, or a passing hound. Attendees bowed or dipped their heads respectfully. Some lords from the Westerlands who had once been sullen now offered warm greetings, having seen that cooperation brought tangible benefits. The Dothraki among the crowd gestured in their own style, calling the child the Little Rider in playful tones. A group of northerners, including House Mandoli representatives, toasted with cups of mead. Dornish visitors raised slender flutes of wine, remarking on how pleasant the capital had become under Targaryen Stark rule. Lady Sansa had arrived the previous day, stepping from her carriage with her own retinue. She embraced Daenerys and Jon, teasing the prince who stared at her with curiosity. Gendry wandered by, telling a funny story about a mishap in his shipyard, drawing laughter from Davos. Even Tyrion, typically guarded at formal events, wore a grin as he moved through the crowd, ensuring guests had enough to eat and drink. He paused to chat with Martin Lannister, who seemed in better spirits now that his region had found a new sense of stability. Brienne, imposing in her armor, stood to one side, ready to intervene if any trouble arose, but the atmosphere was so cheerful she mostly found herself accepting polite bows from passers-by who admired her reputation. At the high point of the celebration, Jon lifted his son in his arms, letting the boy see the bright banners overhead. The courtyard quieted as Daenerys, standing beside them, spoke in a clear voice. 1 year ago, we welcomed our son into a realm scarred by war. Today, we stand united in celebrating not only his growth, but the growth of peace in Westeros. My lords, ladies, and friends across the sea, thank you for joining us. We vow to continue building a future where our children need not fear the shadows of the past. A ripple of applause and cheers spread through the crowd. The child stared wide-eyed at the gathered people, then, as if on cue, let out a delighted shriek and clapped his small hands. Laughter erupted, and the tension that sometimes lingers at great gatherings melted away. An impromptu toast rang out, to Prince Aerys. May he live long and rule wisely. Jon and Daenerys exchanged a soft smile, the baby still perched in Jon's arms. The pledges of loyalty from various houses echoed amid the music and laughter. It was a scene that, years before, would have been unimaginable. Stark and Targaryen united, presiding over a realm that, while not perfect, was determined to find stability and prosperity together. As night fell, lanterns were lit, their warm glow illuminating dancing couples, roaming minstrels, and clusters of guests sharing tales and wine. The king and queen eventually slipped away to a quieter corner, the child asleep in the care of a nursemaid. They leaned against a low wall overlooking the city, distant lights shimmering. The hum of celebration washed over them from behind, but in that private moment, they reveled in the hush that seemed to cradle their hearts. Do you ever think about the battles? Daenerys asked softly, turning her face to Jon. The freezing nights at Winterfell, the terrors we faced? Jon exhaled, sliding an arm around her waist. I do. Sometimes I wake in the night remembering the shrieks of the undead, the endless darkness of the long night. But then I hear our son cry, or I see you smiling, and I know we've left that behind. We carry the memory so we don't repeat the mistakes that led us there. But we're free of it now. She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. I never thought I'd find this kind of peace or this kind of love. The Iron Throne once meant everything to me. Now it's gone, melted by dragon fire, replaced by something far better. Jon's voice was a tender rumble. A realm built on unity, not fear. They stood there for a long time, gazing at the city they had learned to call home. The realm was still large, still brimming with challenges, wild storms in the north, shifting allegiances in the west, the uncertain future of Essos, even potential stirrings in far-flung regions. But for that night, at least, Westeros had found a kind of peace that generations had dreamed of but never seen. Through war and loss, betrayal and sacrifice, they had arrived at a moment when a child's laughter could echo in the halls once filled with screams. In a tucked-away nook of the Red Keep's nursery, the prince slept, warm and secure. Outside, the king and queen continued their quiet vigil, hands intertwined as they watched the horizon. Dawn would come soon enough, bringing fresh concerns and duties. But they could face them together. The last living dragon soared somewhere beyond the clouds, an unseen guardian of a realm forging its destiny by the steady hands of those who had chosen mercy over might. Through all the trials, they had discovered that real power did not lie in swords or thrones, but in the bonds formed between people willing to stand together. And so, while the music of the feast lingered in the night air, Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen faced the future with unshakable hope, each promise they had made now embodied in the small life they protected, in the realm that embraced them both, and in a love that had overcome the darkest storms.